Chapter 3075 Beginning of the Final Battle. Chapter 3075 Beginning of the Final Battle. 3075 Beginning of the Final Battle. Are you surprised? Extermination asked as she looked at Ling Han. There was an eerie smile on her face. Indeed, Ling Han replied with a nod. He looked at Wang Chuanhe, his descendant across many generations. Back then, Ling Han had already had a vague feeling that he was perhaps releasing a sinister demon into the wild. However, Wang Chuanhe had been far too weak, so Ling Han had simply told Ling Zhenxue to keep an eye on him, pushing him back onto the right track whenever he strayed. The problem was, Wang Chuanhe's fortune was far too freakish, so much so that he was able to soar to the heavenly venerable tier in spite of his mediocre talent and unstable cultivation. After Wang Chuanhe reached the heavenly venerable tier, it would naturally be far more difficult to keep an eye on him. Thus, he had suddenly disappeared into thin air one day. However, Ling Han still hadn't imagined that Wang Chuanhe would one day appear before him as a 7th-tier ultimate elite. Not only that, but he was also standing on the side of extermination and hysteria. Why? By doing this, are you still able to keep a clear conscience? Ling Han asked. There's already no one else I care for in this world, Wang Chuanhe replied coldly. Since that's the case, so what if it's destroyed? Moreover, you were clearly the most powerful heavenly venerate at that time, yet you failed to travel around to look for your descendants. It was your actions that led to the destruction of the Wang clan. He paused for a moment, and an intense glimmer appeared in his eyes, revealing his uncontrollable rage. Let me ask you, are you able to keep a clear conscience? This person was far too extreme. It's not too late to turn around and repent, Ling Han said in a solemn voice. Otherwise, I won't show any mercy. Haha. My body is indestructible, so how are you going to suppress me? Wang Chuanhe sneered coldly. He surprisingly took the initiative and charged at Ling Han. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. He launched 3 palm strikes in quick succession, with each strike carrying his full 7th-tier power. These were incredibly powerful attacks. However, could ordinary 7th-tier ultimate elites phase Ling Han now? He simply replied with a casual tap of his finger, easily blocking all of Wang Chuanhe's attacks. However, with Wang Chuanhe holding him back, could Lin Luo and the others stop hysteria? Clearly not. Even though they had 4 more 7th-tier elites than before, extermination was able to easily block all of them by herself. Enjoy the show. This is something that only 7th-tier elites have the honor to watch, extermination said with loud laughter. It was as if she had become one with the void. Ling Han, Lin Luo and the others exclaimed. I'll go. Bai Mifen roared as he charged over, attempting to block Wang Chuanhe for Ling Han. That way, he could free their most powerful main force in Ling Han. However, would extermination allow this? She launched a strike with her slender hand. Peng! A cloud of blood instantly exploded from Bai Mifen's body. Everyone was stunned upon seeing this. 7th-tier ultimate elites were undying and indestructible. Yet, Bai Mifen was bleeding after facing a single strike. How could they not feel numb with shock? Did 7th-tier elites ultimately have to face death as well? Ling Han's pupils contracted. Sure enough, extermination's battle prowess had also increased in leaps and bounds. She had most likely cultivated another dimension to the transcendent level, which allowed her power to increase explosively. It was because of this that she could wound 7th-tier elites with a single strike. He couldn't waste his time on Wang Chuanhe anymore. Otherwise, to say nothing of stopping hysteria, all of his companions would be killed by extermination. Freeze! Ling Han commanded as he made a tapping motion at Wang Chuanhe. A devastating restrictive power crashed down, forcefully pushing the groaning Wang Chuanhe into the ground. With a roar, Ling Han then charged at extermination. Come! Extermination cried as she charged over to meet Ling Han. Peng! The two of them exchanged a blow, causing their clothes to violently billow amid the void windstorms that were countless times more powerful than energy shockwaves. The windstorms rapidly permeated into the surroundings. Lin Luo, Chong Yang, and the others were all sent flying upon being struck by this storm. They were completely unable to withstand it. They were all at the 7th tier, yet the gulf between them was clearly immense. "I'll deal with her. You guys go over to stop hysteria," Ling Han said. "Understood." Lin Luo and the others replied as they charged at hysteria. Chong Yang and the others tried to stop them, yet being fewer in number, they were naturally unable to fully stop Chong Yang and the others. Several attacks instantly slammed into hysteria. However, hysteria didn't react at all, and it simply extended its tentacles to tightly wrap around the celestial realm. It had grown several times more powerful again. The attacks of 7th tier elites had been unable to wound it in the past, so this was further the case right now. The attacks were completely unable to affect it at all. At this moment, hysteria was only a single step away from achieving its dream. Once it engulfed this realm, it would be able to replace the Genesis world. At that time, it would be able to do as it pleased. Thus, did it need to pay any heed to these measly insects? Ling Han frowned and immediately charged at hysteria. "Heh, your opponent is me," Extermination said as she lashed out in an attempt to stop Ling Han. "Piss off." Ling Han roared. He unleashed a punch, and a single symbol lit up on his forehead. An intensely cold chill gripped at Extermination's heart, and she surprisingly felt an immense sense of fear so powerful that she almost didn't dare to face this strike. However, she immediately composed herself, and replied with a punch on her own. They were both the most powerful beings in the world, so what was there for her to be afraid of? Peng! Ling Han's punch struck Extermination head-on, instantly causing her to grunt in pain. She retreated rapidly, with blood furiously pouring from her mouth. What? She was unable to accept this. Not only had her full power strike failed to rival Ling Han, but she had even been wounded. Ling Han's punch had been far too terrifying. Ling Han retracted his fist, with blood also seeping from the skin all over his body. Just then, he activated all of his heavenly venerable seals and increased his power 100,000-fold. However, this had also placed a huge burden on his body. In any case, he was indeed able to wound even Extermination after unleashing this powerful trump card. Ling Han turned around and charged at hysteria. Peng! He threw a punch, and a powerful energy wave gathered on his fist. The further his fist traveled, the more layers this energy wave would gain. It was as if the void were being compressed by him and smashing toward hysteria along with his fist. This strike was far too terrifying. Hysteria roared upon being struck, and it immediately retracted all of its tentacles like an ordinary mortal pulling their hand back from an open flame. Hysteria was colossal as it lay in the void, and it brandished its countless tentacles around as it glared at Ling Han with its huge eyes. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Hundreds of tentacles slammed over. Ling Han swung his fists to block these attacks. Peng, peng, peng. Each swing of his fist was able to send a tentacle flying. His movements were insanely quick, and after throwing several thousand punches, hysteria finally stopped attacking him with its tentacles. This was because its tentacles were pulsating with light in an extremely unstable manner. It had been wounded during their fierce exchanges. Ling Han was also drenched in blood. He had channeled his supreme combination seal, so each attack had caused him to suffer some light wounds. With all the light wounds combined together, this was naturally no longer a light wound. However, what could he do? If he didn't unleash this power, how could he possibly force hysteria to retreat? Ling Han, you're truly full of surprises, Extermination said as she slowly strolled over in the void. However, you can't stop this inevitable trend of the time. Boom! Hysteria and Extermination joined forces to unleash frenzied attacks at Ling Han. To make the impossible possible, and to defy the will of the heavens. This is what it means to be a cultivator, Ling Han roared as he charged over to face their attacks. The final battle officially began. Chapter 3076, 3076 Death. Chapter 3076, 3076 Death. 3076 Death. The battle between Ling Han, Hysteria, and Extermination had already transcended the level of ordinary 7th tier elites. This wasn't a battle that Lin Luo, Chong Yang, and the others could interfere in. Even though hysteria and extermination were theoretically nothing more than ordinary 7th-tier elites, with Ling Han further being only a 6th-tier elite, they were still far more powerful than the other ultimate elites at the peak stage of the 7th tier. Ling Han fought fiercely with his enemies. He was incredibly powerful, and grasping all of the heavenly venerable seals, his explosive power could genuinely be viewed as unfathomably terrifying. In fact, it was possible that he could damage or even obliterate the body of a 7th-tier heavenly venerate with a single strike. However, hysteria and extermination were also unimaginably powerful. After blocking most of the power from his strikes, their indestructible physiques were more than capable of withstanding the remaining power. In contrast to them, Ling Han was only at the 6th tier, so his physique was his glaring weakness. As the battle dragged on, this glaring weakness also became more and more obvious. He was covered in blood, and even his meridians were starting to become chaotic. It was as if they were about to explode. Ling Han, the arrival of a new age is inevitable, yet you still insist on going against the flow. This can only result in death. Extermination said with loud laughter. Even though she was being pushed back with hysteria, neither of them had suffered any genuine wounds to speak of. Instead, it was Ling Han who was becoming increasingly wounded. This would eventually lead to his demise. Why don't you embrace this new age? Ling Han roared with laughter, and chided, what bullsh *t new age? I'll crush them all. Foolish. Extermination spat with an ice-cold expression. If that's your choice, then you can go and die now. The two supremely powerful beings unleashed a barrage of relentless attacks at Ling Han, forcing him to unleash his full strength. They didn't give him any chance to recover, and they forced him to hurt himself more and more. If this continued, whether for a dozen years or 100 years, Ling Han would eventually succumb to his own self-inflicted wounds. Lin Luo and the others naturally understood the situation. They were all extremely worried, yet this wasn't a battle that they could interfere in. If they charged over, being sent flying would be the least of their worries. It was even possible that they might be crushed into smithereens. Haha. Chong Yang and the others were filled with delight. They had all been bullied by Ling Han before, and the 5 ultimate elites from the previous generation had all experienced suppression at his hands. Meanwhile, Golden Silk Moth had almost become Ling Han's servant. As for 10,000 shadows, he would immediately flee whenever he saw Ling Han. These were all humiliating memories. Now that Ling Han was in such a miserable state, they were naturally feeling as delighted and satisfied as could be. This little brat is finally facing his reckoning. We've already let him live for so long, so it is indeed time for us to end his pathetic life. Shut your traps. Bai Miffin bellowed in anger. He unleashed an attack at the traitorous 7th-tier elites. However, their strength was similar, and 7th-tier elites were also unable to wound fellow 7th-tier elites. Thus, Chong Yang and the others wouldn't be affected even if they didn't try to block this attack. However, 7th-tier elites naturally cared about their face. After all, who wanted to be sent flying for no reason? Thus, Chong Yang and the others all decided to counterattack. An intense battle broke out among them again. Ling Han was also aware of his current situation. If this continued, it would only be a matter of time before he was inevitably ripped apart by the devastating power surging within him. However, he definitely couldn't die. Otherwise, everyone in the dimensions inside him would die as well. So, what could he do? Retreat? And allow hysteria to engulf the celestial realm? No. Ling Han shook his head in his mind. There was only one option left. He retrieved several core fragments of the dimension and pressed them to his chest, immediately starting to refine them. These were the core fragments of the profound negative realm, and he hadn't used them this entire time. He had saved them up for this exact moment, the moment when he attempted to break through to the 7th tier. Right now, he needed the physique of a 7th tier elite. This was the decisive moment. Could he sense the 6th type of fundamental power while facing such immense pressure? If he could, and if he managed to extract a wisp to temper his body, then he could immediately obtain an indestructible 7th tier physique. At that time, the burden that caused his skin to crack and blood to seep from his mouth would be nothing more than a mere tickle. At that time, hysteria and extermination would no longer be a threat. Not only that, but he would also be able to cultivate his dimensions to the transcendent level. This would allow him to grow more and more powerful, to a stage where hysteria and extermination would have no option but to be suppressed by him. Come, let me take a gamble. Ling Han refined the core fragments of the dimension. This was because dimensions naturally extracted fundamental power from the void as well before transforming it into something that they could use. Moreover, this fundamental power was extracted and transformed through the cores of the dimensions. Thus, refining the core of a dimension would allow one to lay eyes on the fundamental power of the Genesis world. More importantly, Ling Han was far too powerful, and this severely inhibited him from detecting the last fundamental power of the Genesis world. Moreover, these were only core fragments of the dimension, and not a complete core of the dimension, so the power they contained would definitely be far inferior in comparison. Thus, everything was reliant on Ling Han being able to withstand this immense pressure. Come, come, come. Ling Han roared in his mind. His follicles opened up, and he attempted to detect that last remaining fundamental power. Hysteria and extermination naturally noticed this, so they both increased the speed and ferocity of their attacks in an attempt to distract Ling Han and prevent him from advancing to the 7th tier. Boom, boom. The battle between them was intense, and Ling Han continued to vomit large mouthfuls of blood. This wasn't as a result of being wounded by hysteria or extermination, but instead as a result of unleashing his supremely powerful attacks. His wounds became increasingly severe, and his recovery speed was unable to keep up with them, even though the dimensions inside him were brimming with powerful life force. A cruel smile tugged at the corners of Extermination's mouth, and she murmured, "Die, hurry up and die already. I can't wait to swallow your body and obtain all of your secrets." Ling Han didn't reply. Instead, he fought against them with his full power. 1 day, 3 days, 10 days. This was far longer than what hysteria and extermination had expected. Ling Han had actually managed to hold on for so long. However, his situation was also becoming increasingly dire. His willpower was simply terrifying. It all ends here. Extermination sneered coldly. Her attacks became even more ferocious. Peng. Clouds of blood exploded from Ling Han's body, after which he was no longer able to defend himself. Would hysteria and extermination go easy on him because of this? No. They would naturally seize this opportunity to kill him once and for all. Their attacks furiously slammed into Ling Han, whose body had yet to become undying and indestructible. Thus, they could genuinely kill him if they managed to breach his defenses. Boom, boom, boom. Boundless energy windstorms erupted, with the two formidable beings frenzied as they attacked Ling Han. This was utterly terrifying. Lin Luo, Chong Yang, and the others were unable to see clearly through the wild storms of energy. However, they understood that Ling Han was most likely facing a perilous situation with little hope of recovery. After all, he was only at the 6th tier, so it was inevitable that he would be crushed to death once his defenses were breached. Lin Luo and the others were filled with panic. However, to say nothing of the fact that they were being obstructed by Chong Yang and his ilk, what could they do even if they charged over? Could they stop hysteria and extermination? Any one of them would be able to severely wound or even kill them. What could they do? Was this the end? Was it already impossible to rectify the situation? Hysteria and extermination finally ceased their attacks. The energy windstorms also started to slowly dissipate. When the void stabilized again, what they saw was Ling Han hovering in the void, with his limbs hanging by his side and his body drowned in blood. Was he dead? The expressions of Lin Luo and the others changed drastically. They could no longer sense any life force from Ling Han. Everything was truly done for. Ha 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 ha. Meanwhile, Chong Yang and the others all chortled with laughter. They had already waited far too long for this day. Extermination suddenly turned around. Just then, she had already been walking over to kill Lin Luo and the others. Hysteria also stopped in its tracks. It had initially been slithering over to engulf the celestial realm. Hovering in the void, Ling Han's finger moved ever so slightly. Chapter 3077, 3077 7th Tier. Chapter 3077, 3077 7th Tier. 3077 7th Tier. Ling Han, Lin Luo and the others exclaimed. They were all filled with delight. Boom! A powerful aura suddenly erupted from Ling Han's body, and it was as if torrential waves were crashing into the surroundings. This brat didn't die. Not only that, but he even advanced to the 7th tier. Extermination muttered in disbelief. Her raven hair danced wildly in the wind, reflecting the disorderly emotions in her mind. How is this possible? He had suffered severe self-inflicted wounds and shattered his own defenses, after which he had been furiously attacked by two of the most powerful 7th-tier ultimate elites in the world. Moreover, he didn't possess the indestructible body of a 7th-tier elite, so he should have been killed as comprehensively as could be. I've yet to obliterate you people, so how can I die so easily? Ling Han said as he suddenly stood up straight. He was still drenched in blood, and he was still riddled with wounds. At this moment, however, he was filled with soaring spirit and energy. How is this possible? Extermination spat through gritted teeth. She couldn't accept this reality. Being attacked by her and hysteria was no joke. This wasn't something that one could overcome through grit and determination alone. Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, "Don't you two know? The more pressure I'm under, the more motivation I feel." It was in that moment of life or death that he had borrowed the power of the core fragment to initiate communication with the 6th type of fundamental power. Even though he had only extracted a wisp of this fundamental power, it had been enough to elevate his physique to a state of indestructibility. Add to that the overwhelming powers of dimension inside him, and he was naturally able to withstand the frenzied attacks of the two supremely powerful beings. His strength was almost identical to before, yet his physique had finally reached a state of indestructibility. This signified that he had no more weaknesses. He was flawless. "Come, let me show you true strength," Ling Han said with loud laughter. He actively charged at hysteria and extermination, swinging his fists and unleashing a barrage of wild attacks. Peng! It was only one strike, yet extermination was already sent flying. Another strike, and hysteria's colossal body was sent flying as well. It was as if hysteria were a giant toy being tossed through the air. After advancing to the 7th tier, Ling Han's power was now unrivaled, and his physique was now indestructible. This was a most perfect form. Hysteria and extermination bellowed in fury as they charged back over. However, against this peerless man, they could do nothing but grit their teeth and endure punishment. In reality, this was quite similar to before. Ling Han attacked, while the two of them defended. In the past, however, Ling Han would suffer self-inflicted wounds while he attacked them. Moreover, these wounds would increase in severity until he eventually shattered his own defenses. But now, Ling Han had already resolved this problem. His body was now invincible, and he no longer needed to worry about wounding himself from the huge burden. What can we do? It was now hysteria and extermination's turn to feel worried. Now that Ling Han had advanced to the 7th tier, it signified that there was still more room for his battle prowess to grow. All he needed was some time. In other words, hysteria and extermination would remain at the same level, while Ling Han would gradually grow stronger and stronger as he fought. If this continued, there would eventually come a day when they were defeated, suppressed, or even killed. Hysteria became truly wild at this moment, swinging its tentacles in a crazy manner and acting as if it wanted to suppress Ling Han. However, what use would this be? "You block him first," Extermination suddenly said to Hysteria using her divine sense. With a flash, she rapidly retreated from the battlefield. Ling Han frowned slightly. However, only Hysteria was capable of swallowing the celestial realm, so it was this monster that he needed to pay the most attention to. He didn't need to pay much attention to the others. Once he disposed of Hysteria, the catastrophic threat lingering over the Genesis world would also be swept away. At that time, extermination wouldn't be able to do anything regardless of how powerful she was. One had to realize that the Genesis world was also filled with life and vitality. Even though there was only a single dimension remaining, this dimension could still slowly manifest new dimensions, eventually leading to a flourishing situation just like before. He continued to pummel Hysteria. Just his raw power alone was already enough to rival Hysteria, or perhaps even suppress it. Now that his power had increased 100,000-fold, just how devastating was the situation? Hysteria was instantly forced to scramble back in retreat. Without extermination helping it, it was completely unable to block Ling Han's attacks. Ling Han gave chase, and was just about to suppress Hysteria. However, he suddenly felt a dull pain in his chest, and his attack immediately skewed to the side and missed its target. What's going on? Wasn't he an invincible 7th tier elite? So why was he still feeling pain in his chest? Ling Han didn't give this much thought, and he threw another punch at Hysteria. However, he felt another burst of pain in his chest, a pain so uncomfortable that he could barely control himself. This was definitely no coincidence. Ling Han swept his gaze over the surroundings. This was definitely related to extermination. Otherwise, she wouldn't have left the battlefield for no reason. "Looking for me?" Extermination asked. Using her formidable power, she could rapidly send her words to anywhere in the void. She walked over, holding someone in her hand. Wang Chuanhe. He had already been suppressed by Ling Han just then. Regardless, he wouldn't have been able to rival extermination even if he were at his peak state. Ling Han's pupils contracted. Perhaps the pain in his chest was related to Wang Chuanhe. "Extermination, what are you doing?" Wang Chuanhe howled in fury. "If I hadn't wanted to use you as a backup plan, would I have raised you with all my effort and even destroyed a dimension to help you advance to the 7th tier? Extermination sneered. "It's time for you to show your worth now." What? It was because extermination had destroyed one of her dimensions that Wang Chuanhe was able to advance to the 7th tier? Since these were dimensions, they naturally had dimension cores as well. Moreover, extermination possessed transcendent dimensions inside her, so bestowing Wang Chuanhe with a dimension core from one of these dimensions was indeed enough to raise him to the 7th tier. One had to realize that a transcendent dimension was equivalent to at least 10 7th tier elites. Thus, paying such a huge price to raise a single 7th tier elite could be regarded as extremely extravagant. Extermination was no charitable person, either, so why had she decided to help Wang Chuanhe? "This is called the blood murder technique," Extermination explained calmly. "As long as two people share the same bloodline, this technique will allow me to wound one person and therefore wound the other person at the same time. However, if the target is too powerful, the person being wounded by the technique also needs to be powerful enough. So that's why I helped him advance to the 7th tier." Extermination smiled, and continued, "I initially thought that this was an unnecessary plan, one that needlessly caused me to lose a significant amount of my battle prowess. Now, however, it looks like I was very correct to take such extreme measures. Ling Han, you truly can't be underestimated." As she said this, she stabbed her fingers into Wang Chuanhe's chest. This was extremely uncanny, and Ling Han immediately felt a piercing pain in his chest as well. It was as if his heart were about to explode. Gasp. "This blood murder technique is truly powerful. Extermination, you'll definitely suffer a wretched death." Wang Chuanhe roared. "Shut up." Extermination ordered coldly. "You should already count yourself lucky that a piece of trash like you was able to witness the secrets of the 7th tier. Did you really think I took a fancy to a useless fool like you?" Ling Han came to a sudden realization. No wonder Wang Chuanhe had betrayed him so resolutely. As it turned out, part of the reason had been the feeling of affection between him and Extermination. Extermination was indeed a breathtaking beauty, and Wang Chuanhe was also someone who had suffered a tragedy when it came to love. Thus, it wasn't strange that he had fallen for Extermination's purposeful seduction. Even though Ling Han found this plan a little shameless, he couldn't help but admire Extermination for her resoluteness and farsightedness. She had sacrificed so much power and effort simply to raise a pawn that she most likely wouldn't need to use. Chapter 3078 Engulfing the World. Chapter 3078 Engulfing the World. 3078 Engulfing the World. To sacrifice a dimension, a transcendent level dimension. Even Ling Han would be reluctant to do this if he only had a set number of dimensions. Extermination was truly a resolute and ruthless person. Ancestor, I was wrong, Wang Chuanhe cried. He tried to unleash his 7th-tier power to fight against extermination, yet the gulf between them was far too great. Before extermination, he was like a newborn chick standing in front of a vicious old eagle. He couldn't resist at all. Ling Han wanted to charge over, yet extermination simply launched a palm strike at Wang Chuanhe. Ling Han wildly vomited blood, and he was instantly stopped cold in his tracks. This so-called blood murder technique was definitely no ordinary secret technique. Instead, this was most likely a secret technique that pertained to the secret of the Genesis world. Ling Han was powerless to do anything. Extermination had paid such a heavy price to gain this advantage, so how could it be something that was easy to resolve? Are you not going to hurry up and finish your job? Extermination roared at Hysteria. Hysteria glared at her for a moment. This was its body from the previous era, yet it couldn't help but feel extremely distant and unfamiliar with it at this moment. Just what kind of being was Hysteria? It was naturally ticked off at being ordered around like this. However, it still suppressed its anger. Once it engulfed the celestial realm, the power of the entire Genesis world would flow into its body. At that time, it would become the most powerful being in the world. It would be able to suppress and kill anyone it wanted. Very well, I'll let you enjoy your arrogance for a while longer. Hysteria flew toward the celestial realm. It had only formed a temporary alliance with extermination, and it naturally wouldn't tolerate someone being more powerful than it and ordering it around. Ling Han wanted to stop Hysteria, yet he couldn't move his body at all. Extermination simply needed to strike Wang Chuanhe, and this would immediately cause him to suffer severe wounds. His face was as white as a sheet. He was definitely more durable than Wang Chuanhe, and he wouldn't be killed even if Wang Chuanhe was killed by extermination. The problem was, extermination simply needed to obstruct him and give Hysteria enough time to engulf the final dimension. What about Lin Luo and the others? They were completely powerless to do anything. So, what could they do now? Even though Ling Han had already advanced to the 7th tier, gaining peerless power, he was still unable to prevent the worst-case scenario from playing out. Lin Luo and the others dearly wished that this was nothing more than a nightmare that they would wake up from. However, Hysteria had already wrapped its tentacles around the celestial realm and started to engulf it again. With its insane speed, it would only need a maximum of 10 years to destroy the celestial realm. 10 years. Could Ling Han turn the tables in such a short amount of time? Looking at the current situation, Ling Han was completely suppressed by the blood murder technique and unable to break free. The key to everything was Wang Chuanhe. Lin Luo and the others were all brimming with killing intent. If they could kill Wang Chuanhe, then Ling Han would also be set free. Die. Lin Luo and the others charged at extermination. However, Chong Yang and the others were no pushovers, so with them in the way, only 4 of them managed to arrive before extermination. Here to seek death. Extermination asked in amusement as she unleashed a palm strike. Pa, 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 pa. The 4 people were immediately sent flying, vomiting blood as they crashed through the air. Extermination was no match for Ling Han, yet she possessed an absolute advantage over the other 7th-tier elites. None of them could withstand a single strike from her. To say nothing to 4 7th-tier elites, even 10 7th-tier elites would make no difference if they charged up to her. Ha 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 ha. Extermination roared with laughter. Her long hair billowed in the wind, and her slender body swayed slightly. She appeared as breathtaking and seductive as could be. Her victory was already set in stone. 1 month, 6 months, 12 months. Lin Luo and the others were powerless as they watched the celestial realm rapidly shrink piece by piece. Meanwhile, Hysteria was seemingly undergoing some kind of transformation as well. To gather the power of the entire Genesis world into one body. Just what kind of qualitative change would this lead to? Ling Han was still unable to stand up. Even though Wang Chuanhe had already been dismembered by extermination, just how powerful was a 7th-tier elite's life force? Thus, he didn't die even though he had suffered such severe wounds. In fact, 7th-tier elites couldn't even commit suicide. 3 years, 5 years, 8 years. The celestial realm was already in its death throes. Meanwhile, the initially pitch-black hysteria surprisingly started to transform as well. It first turned white, before turning silver, and then finally toward gold. It transformed slowly, and it was very likely that it would become completely golden once it finished engulfing the celestial realm. 9 years and a half. The celestial realm was about to expose its core. It was also at this moment that Wang Chuanhe was finally tortured to death by extermination. 7th-tier heavenly venerates were indeed undying, but this was also dependent on the situation. For example, Yellow Sand and the extermination's previous self had both been killed by the destructive power of the Genesis world of the previous era. Now that extermination's strength had also reached a similar level, it was only natural that she was able to kill a 7th-tier elite as well. Ah! Wang Chuanhe wailed in agony as his soul floated out of his body, which had already been completely obliterated. Lin Luo and the others didn't feel a shred of sympathy. He had chosen this fate himself. After all, who told him to side with extermination and hysteria? Scheming with sinister individuals would naturally lead to a wretched death. Now for the final strike, extermination said as she jabbed her slender finger at Wang Chuanhe's divine sense. Comparatively speaking, the divine senses of 7th-tier elites were far weaker than their physical bodies. Wang Chuanhe's divine sense was instantly obliterated. He was as dead could be. Ling Han clasped his head in agony. Under the influence of the blood murder technique, it was as if a blade had been violently plunged into his divine sense. This caused a splitting pain to engulf his head. In the next instant, however, he had already dashed forward. His target was none other than hysteria. He had to stop it. There was almost no time remaining. Now that Wang Chuanhe had died, Ling Han had no time to worry about whether he should feel sympathy or apathy toward this extreme descendant. Ling Han charged over and threw a furious punch. Wang! Like waves in a pond, golden light rippled across hysteria's body. The power of Ling Han's strike was completely dissipated over hysteria's colossal body, reducing its destructive power by countless times. As such, it was completely unable to wound hysteria. Meanwhile, hysteria didn't waste any time as it continued to ravenously engulf the celestial realm. Ling Han roared and threw another punch. Peng! Extermination dashed over in a timely manner, blocking his strike with her palm. Even though she was sent flying, her interference still succeeded in blocking most of Ling Han's power. Hysteria faced this attack head-on as it watched the celestial realm collapse completely. The core of the dimension flew out, and it was as if it wanted to engage in a final struggle. However, the entire celestial realm was already surrounded by hysteria, so how could the core of the dimension escape? Hysteria widened its maws and swallowed the core. Spit it out! Ling Han roared as he furiously attacked hysteria. Peng! 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 He unleashed countless attacks at this instant, causing hysteria's golden body to shudder violently. Whoosh! Hysteria counterattacked, using a tentacle to whip Ling Han's fist. Wang! A devastating power rippled through the air, blasting Ling Han back. Meanwhile, hysteria's tentacle also bounced back slightly. This exchange had ended in a draw. Gasp! After engulfing the final dimension and obtaining the power of the entire Genesis world, hysteria's power had also grown to an unfathomable level. One had to realize that it was unable to channel the heavenly venerable seals, it was only able to wield its raw power. Yet, it was still powerful enough to rival Ling Han, who had already increased his power 100,000-fold. Just how insanely powerful had it become? There was no dispute that it was the most powerful being in the world. Ha 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 ha. Hysteria roared with laughter. Its strength was still increasing, and the power of the Genesis world was still boundlessly gathering. This was an infinite power that made it feel as if everything was within its grasp. Chapter 3079 fading away, regardless of success or failure. Chapter 3079 fading away, regardless of success or failure. 3079 fading away, regardless of success or failure. The celestial realm was destroyed, and the Genesis world was annihilated. Everything was engulfed by hysteria, and all that remained was a boundless expanse of nothingness. Seventh-tier elites were undying, so were they all going to wander in this vast and empty void forever? Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Hysteria roared with laughter. It had waited for this day for far too long. From its past life to its present life, and after experiencing the destruction of 2 Genesis worlds, it had finally succeeded. Extermination flew over, and said, "Why are you laughing like an idiot? I've already put up with you for too long." Hysteria howled as it lashed out at extermination. Right now, it had already become the Genesis world. The longer that passed, the more powerful it would become. Before succeeding, it had still needed to rely on extermination to hold Linghan back. Now that it had succeeded, however, was there still any need for extermination? Hysteria didn't need to share this success with anyone. Peng. Extermination naturally wouldn't stand there and allow Hysteria to attack her as it pleased. She moved to block its attack, yet she was immediately sent flying. She stabilized herself after flying 50,000 kilometers into the distance. There was a cold smile on her face, and she was surprisingly calm as she said, "I initially thought that you would remain composed for a while longer. At the very least, I didn't expect you to turn on your ally so quickly." Since things had already come to this, Linghan was no longer in a hurry like before. The Genesis world had already been engulfed by Hysteria, so Hysteria was now the new Genesis world. If one entered Hysteria's body, they would then be subject to Hysteria's rules. Linghan wanted to see what extermination's true purpose was. After doing so many unreasonable things to help Hysteria, just what was she truly after? Hysteria was also slightly puzzled. Even though its body was colossal, it had indeed been a person at the very start. It was just that this person had entered their current body using their divine sense. Afterward, they had then transformed themselves into a dimension. In any case, there was nothing wrong with Hysteria's intelligence, so it naturally realized something was off about extermination's attitude right now. Firstly, why had extermination helped it? Hysteria didn't care much about this, and it only cared about the outcome. Secondly, why was extermination completely unsurprised by its betrayal? Just what was she playing at? This was clearly its previous self, yet Hysteria couldn't help but feel extremely distant and unfamiliar with her. It felt like she was a complete stranger. "So what if I've turned on you? Can you do anything about it?" Hysteria replied using its divine sense as it brandished its countless tentacles. "Everything is within my grasp," Extermination replied calmly. She appeared as composed as could be. Is she acting? Hysteria was extremely puzzled. She was at the 7th tier, so would she be a fool? So be it if extermination had allied with it because it had tricked her. However, this wasn't the case. Instead, it was extermination who had actively chosen to ally with it. She was definitely no fool. The problem was, it possessed the power of the entire Genesis world right now, so who could rival it? Me. Regardless of what your plans are, they're all futile in the face of absolute power, Hysteria declared as it swung a tentacle at extermination. Only a short moment had passed, yet its power had already increased threefold. Origin destroying strike. Extermination cried as she made a tapping motion with her finger. Her movements were ethereal and beautiful. Wang. A ray of light shot into Hysteria's body, yet extermination was also sent flying by Hysteria's strike. If she had been an ordinary 7th tier elite, she would have potentially been killed by this strike. Ha ha ha. Is this your trump card? Hysteria laughed. Before my absolute strength, your struggles are all in vain. Whoosh. It swung another tentacle at extermination. Extermination dodged, not facing this attack head-on. When the Genesis world of the last era was destroyed, countless souls and wills fused together. Within this, there was even the will of the Genesis world itself, Extermination said. It was as if she were giving Hysteria a lesson. However, Ling Han, Lin Luo, Chong Yang, and the others were all listening carefully. It was very likely that Extermination was about to reveal a huge secret. The Genesis world also has a will of its own, even though this will is extremely subtle and weak. The only information contained in this will is information regarding how the Genesis world has nurtured life, extermination explained. Of course, with life also comes death. As for me, I'm someone who managed to obtain this information, extermination said as she pointed at herself. A breathtakingly beautiful smile spread across her face. However, it's a shame that the Genesis world of the last era was destroyed, leading to most of this information being lost as well. I was only able to grasp a small portion of it. She looked at Hysteria, and continued, coincidentally, the information I received was the secret codes of death. Hysteria's expression changed drastically. This expression was also reflected on its colossal body, in the sense that the color of its skin started to change rapidly and chaotically. Someone as powerful as extermination definitely wouldn't bluff. In addition, extermination continued. You truly shouldn't have transformed yourself into a dimension. You learned from the mistake of your past life, and you realized that even the destructive power of the exploding Genesis world wouldn't be able to kill you if you transformed into a dimension. However, the existence of the Genesis world naturally follows its own set of regulations. There are secret codes of life, and there are also secret codes of death. What these secret codes target are dimensions. Hysteria's tentacles started to sway again, signifying its fluctuating emotions. Extermination looked at Ling Han, and said, I already told you before a new age is about to arrive. Why don't you believe me? Ling Han's expression was cold. Extermination had seemingly tricked everyone with her schemes. She had used Wang Chuanhe to target Ling Han, and she had also set a trap for Hysteria long ago. Who exactly are you? He asked. Me. Extermination said with a faint smile. There's no hurry. It's not time to reveal this secret yet. She looked at Hysteria, and continued, this is the final dimension of the Genesis world. Once it's destroyed, the door to a new world will open, allowing us to walk out of this small pond. Chong Yang and the others were all filled with excitement. It was because of this that they had chosen to ally with extermination. Moreover, they would also obtain huge benefits when Hysteria died, and it was even possible that they could advance to the 8th tier. Absolute nonsense. Hysteria bellowed. Its divine sense boomed into the surroundings, causing tumultuous waves to crash through the minds of the 7th tier elites. It brandished its tentacles and attacked extermination, roaring, I'll kill you first. Extermination immediately dodged its attacks. Even though she was nowhere near as powerful as Ling Han, she was also a powerful 7th tier elite just like Hysteria. Thus, she could dodge at least 90% of Hysteria's attacks. Even when she was occasionally struck, she was more than powerful enough to withstand the attacks. Hysteria, since you've transformed into a dimension, you have no option but to abide by the rules that dictate dimensions. This won't change even though you've already engulfed all of the other dimensions. And when we look at the life cycle of dimensions, it's only reasonable that they eventually face destruction. Hysteria continued to ferociously attack her, yet before long, its body quickly started to become unstable. Rays of light started to bounce around inside its body, and it was as if they all yearned to shoot out. Perhaps extermination's words were true. Perhaps Hysteria was genuinely about to be destroyed. This was truly inconceivable. After engulfing the entire Genesis world, Hysteria should have been charging toward the peak of its life. Yet, it was at this exact moment that it passed its zenith and started to plummet. 1, 2, 3, 4. Extermination continued to count, and when she reached 59, Hysteria finally lost its power to attack. Countless rays of light crashed around inside it, causing its colossal golden body to shudder violently. No, I'm the most powerful and mighty being in this world. I've engulfed the entire Genesis world, so I'm now going to leap out of this expanse of heaven and earth. Hysteria roared. Its divine sense fluctuated through the void. Lin Luo and the others naturally saw everything. They were filled with astonishment. Was extermination going to turn around and prove her innocence now? Hysteria's aura became increasingly unstable. At the same time, its body also started to expand. It was like a balloon that had been filled with too much air, about to explode at any moment. Chapter 3080 Continually Changing Situation. Chapter 3080 Continually Changing Situation. 3080 Continually Changing Situation. Everyone was deeply astonished, including Ling Han. This turn of events was truly unexpected. Hysteria had just reached the peak of its life, yet it had quickly fallen to rock bottom in the very next instant. Was it done for? Was it about to die? Extermination, just who in the world are you? Hysteria roared using its divine sense. It discovered the perilous situation of its body, and it realized that it might explode at any moment. It was using its full strength to stabilize its body, yet it was as if that destructive power were the ultimate will of heaven and earth. This was a will that didn't heed his command. Extermination clasped her hands behind her back, and explained calmly, with life comes inevitable death. Separation begets union, and union begets separation. Do you know? Every world and every dimension has an upper limit regarding how much power it can contain. After engulfing so many realms, the power that you've absorbed has already surpassed this limit. So, even if I hadn't targeted you, you would have still struggled to escape this fate of destruction. I simply accelerated the process. Hysteria was boiling with rage. If extermination hadn't used that so-called origin-destroying strike, would it have been forced into this perilous state? If it were given enough time, it could have torn open the void using its absolute strength and jumped out of this small and restrictive pond. Of course, Hysteria naturally didn't know what lay beyond the void. Was it a more spectacular world, or was it an ice-cold and desolate land of nothingness? Regardless, as long as it left this world, it would no longer have to suffer the restriction of this heaven and earth. Now, however, was everything going to be destroyed by its past self? Why? Everyone, are you not going to hurry up and attack? We can't allow it to unleash a dying attack and cause immense damage, Extermination said as she looked at Ling Han and the others. To be more precise, she was specifically talking to Ling Han. After all, no one else could cause any damage to Hysteria, even though it was already in such dire straits. Not only that, but a casual counterattack from Hysteria could easily kill even 7th-tier elites. The death of Extermination and Yellow Sand in the last era was proof of this fact. The might of the Genesis world was unstoppable, and the invincibility of 7th-tier elites was not absolute. Thus, only Ling Han was powerful enough to attack it. Ling Han frowned upon hearing this. Everything was progressing according to Extermination's plans. Not long ago, she had obstructed Ling Han and given Hysteria the opportunity to engulf all of the dimensions. Now, however, she was screwing Hysteria over and pushing it to the brink of destruction. Just what was she playing at? Ling Han felt an instinctive urge to refuse her proposal. However, Hysteria had already become their greatest threat, so it was necessary that they eliminate it as soon as possible. If it were killed now, they still had an opportunity to rebuild the Genesis world. However, Extermination was definitely scheming something else. She definitely wasn't trying to help them. If she had truly been acting in the best interests of the Genesis world, then she would have allied with Ling Han a long time ago. With Ling Han's power at that time, they could have easily suppressed Hysteria and stopped it from advancing. Once Ling Han advanced to the 7th tier, they could have then killed Hysteria with relative ease. Yet, things had come to this instead. That being the case, Extermination's aim was definitely more than just killing Hysteria. In any case, she had repeatedly mentioned a new age and jumping out of this small pond. Thus, killing Hysteria was most likely only a single aspect of her plans. The problem was, what if Extermination knew that Ling Han would think like this? Thus, she was doing the opposite of what she meant, and her true intention was actually for Ling Han not to attack. Ling Han felt slightly hesitant. There was an information asymmetry between them, so he could only rely on guessing. He looked at Extermination, and Extermination simply smiled faintly at him. She was stunningly beautiful, and it was as if everything was within her grasp. Ling Han immediately made up his mind. Whoosh! He charged forward and unleashed a furious punch at Hysteria. The reason for this was simple. If Extermination didn't block his attack, then that would mean that she truly wanted him to attack Hysteria. If that were the case, Then he would retract his attack straight away. If the inverse were true, however, and extermination stepped forward to block him, then it would prove that she was uttering a load of trash. His attack was as quick as lightning. Extermination didn't stop him, yet Ling Han didn't retract his attack, either. Just as Ling Han's fist was about to strike Hysteria. Whoosh! Extermination finally made her move. She immediately dashed beside Hysteria and unleashed a palm strike at Ling Han. The three of them were almost standing in a straight line, with Hysteria in the middle. Moreover, Extermination was closer to Hysteria, so even though she had launched her attack later, it was her attack that landed first. Peng! Extermination was immediately sent flying by the shockwave, with her face as white as a sheet. Even as strong as Extermination was, she still couldn't withstand the power of Ling Han's devastating attack. She would definitely be at a disadvantage if she faced his attacks head-on. Surprisingly, however, Ling Han didn't attack her or Hysteria again. There was surprise in Extermination's beautiful eyes as she stood in the distance. "You're very good at acting. You purposely stepped forward just then, and you acted as if you wanted to stop me at all costs," Ling Han said calmly. "However, since you've set up such a scenario, you naturally would have considered the fact that I would guess your intentions and use this method to probe you. So, I speculated that you've set up a scheme within a scheme. This current scenario is still a facade, something you're using to cover up your true intentions." Extermination's expression finally changed. "What?" She vomited a mouthful of blood, which immediately combusted upon hitting the ground, turning into a pile of ashes. She stared at Ling Han for a long time, eventually saying, "Who would have thought that you could make such a calm judgment in such a short amount of time and in the face of such a complicated situation?" Ling Han shook his head, and said, "I was simply taking a gamble." Extermination suddenly roared with laughter, and said, "Very well. Then you've gambled correctly. However, after planning and preparing for so many years, is this something that you can interfere with?" She recited some chant, and her beautiful face instantly became even paler. She spat out another mouthful of blood, and this again combusted into ashes just like before. She then pointed at Hysteria from a distance. Whoosh! A burst of black air rushed at Hysteria. This was definitely nothing good. Ling Han humphed coldly and swung a fist at the burst of black air. Meanwhile, Lin Luo and the others all wore strange expressions. The situation was changing far too quickly. In the beginning, it had been them struggling and trying to attack Hysteria, while Extermination was the one doing everything she could to stop them. Now, however, the situation was the complete opposite. It was Extermination who was trying to attack Hysteria, and it was Ling Han who was trying to stop her and protect Hysteria. This situation was far too strange. Ling Han's punch slammed into the burst of black air. However, his fist eerily passed through the black air, and it was as if the black air didn't exist at all. Whoosh! The black air entered Hysteria's body and didn't exit again. Ling Han turned around to observe the situation with a frown. What was this black air? It was ineffective against him, yet it was incredibly destructive toward Hysteria. Hysteria's aura became increasingly unstable after being infiltrated by the black air, and it was as if it were about to explode at any moment. "This is another secret code of death that I obtained from the Genesis world's will of the last era," Extermination explained calmly. However, unleashing this attack had placed a huge burden on her, and she immediately spat out another mouthful of blood. Her aura also plummeted drastically. "This attack is only effective against dimensions, so it's impossible for you to stop it." Ling Han chuckled coldly, saying, "With your current situation, how many more times can you unleash such an attack?" He charged at Extermination, not giving her another opportunity to attack. Extermination dodged, not willing to face Ling Han head-on. Instead, she found opportunities to continually attack Hysteria. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. She attacked Hysteria again and again. Even though the burden on her was so immense that she wanted to vomit her internal organs, she still persisted and continued to attack. She attacked relentlessly, and Hysteria was finally unable to withstand this pressure any longer. Its colossal body undulated like water, and all of a sudden, a column of blindingly bright light erupted from its body. Chapter 3081, 3081 Self-Destruction of Hysteria. Chapter 3081, 3081 Self-Destruction of Hysteria. 3081 Self-Destruction of Hysteria. Hysteria was self-destructing. A column of blindingly brilliant light soared into the air, forcing even Ling Han to shut his eyes lest he be blinded. In the next instant, however, he immediately started to move. He flew toward Lin Luo and the others, directly grabbing them and putting them under his protection. Boom! Behind him, a devastating shock wave roared over, much like a tsunami wave crashing toward a shore. He was directly sent flying. Ling Han defended with his full strength, with his powers of dimension from tens of millions of dimensions intertwining into a web that blocked the petrifying shock wave behind him. Hysteria's self-destruction had ignited a catastrophic explosion. The entire Genesis world had been engulfed by hysteria, so upon self-destructing, this was equivalent to the entire Genesis world being ignited at once. Moreover, this was a Genesis world that had been compressed into a single dimension. Thus, the scale of the explosion was naturally even more devastating. It was clear that Ling Han couldn't withstand such a powerful explosion. Instead, he could only go with the flow and choose to be sent flying by the overwhelming shock waves of the explosion. If he dared to resist, he would be severely wounded even if he weren't killed. At the same time, the majority of people in the dimensions inside him would also be killed. Rumble. All that remained in the void was a series of deafening explosions and rumbles. As the explosive shock waves ripped through the void, even the void storms were comprehensively reduced to nothingness. This was no longer a matter of how far Ling Han was sent flying. Instead, it was a matter of how long Ling Han was carried by this explosive shock wave from hysteria's self-destruction. A whopping 100 million years. Who could have imagined this? The humongous explosion caused by hysteria's self-destruction had lasted an insane 100 million years. Only after all these years did the energy windstorm finally start to subside. Ling Han stood still and unclenched his hands, releasing Lin Luo and the others. "We need to go back," Ling Han said. With a stomp of his foot, a giant pair of wings unfurled behind him. It was created by a combination of fundamental power and powers of dimension. With a flap of his wings, his speed immediately reached an incredible level, rapidly bringing him back to the location where hysteria had self-destructed. Lin Luo and the others quickly followed after him. Perhaps there could exist huge gulfs between the battle prowess of different 7th-tier elites. However, their speed was something that wouldn't differ by much. Ling Han was indeed slightly quicker than them, but only by a small margin. Another 100 million years passed, and Ling Han and the others finally arrived back at their original location. Following hysteria's self-destruction, even the energy windstorms in the void were reduced to nothingness. However, the void was far too large, so it was most likely only a matter of time before the storms of energy from other locations slowly permeated this area again. At that time, everything would return to normal. Many years into the future, perhaps a new Genesis world would be born again. Death was the conclusion of life, yet death itself was not an absolute conclusion. Instead, it represented a new beginning. Where hysteria had stood before, there was surprisingly a fuzzy door. Looking at this door, it was as if they could vaguely see the world that lay behind it. In terms of what actually existed in this world, however, they were at a complete loss. Was this the so-called door that would lead them out of this small pond? Above this door, there also hovered a golden orb that was spinning and occasionally releasing a beam of light that illuminated the void. Whoosh! Extermination, Chong Yang, and the others also flew over. Excitement and anticipation appeared on their faces when they saw the fuzzy door and the golden orb above it. Were these the things that they were after? Whoosh! Another figure flew over from some other direction. Ling Han turned around, and he couldn't help but feel astonished. This wasn't a person, but instead a golden octopus. It was approximately 9 meters long, and its 8 tentacles swayed under its body. Hysteria. This was indeed hysteria, even though his body was countless times smaller than before. It actually hadn't died. Extermination, the octopus bellowed as it glowered at extermination. Its tentacles flicked through the air, and it appeared as furious as could be. Extermination swept her gaze over it, and said, "Oh, so you also had a hidden backup plan. You hid your true core inside your colossal body, so even after it was destroyed, you were still able to manifest your true core and stay alive. After being destroyed by the Genesis world of the last era, how could I not have a backup plan?" Hysteria humphed coldly. "Anyway, it's also good that you didn't die. Personally killing you will give me a great sense of achievement," Extermination said. She suddenly reached over, with her target being the golden orb above the fuzzy door. "In your dreams," Ling Han shouted as he directly charged over, throwing a fist at the same time. After going through all this trouble, Extermination's true aim was most likely this golden orb, right? He definitely couldn't let her succeed. Whoosh. Hysteria also moved, brandishing its tentacles as it charged over. Peng. 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 The three elites became engaged in an intense battle. Hysteria had definitely been the most powerful of the three before, yet its dimensional-level self-destruction had naturally changed the situation. Even though its true core wasn't destroyed, the new body that it had manifested was 1,000,000 times weaker than before. In terms of raw power, it was even weaker than Extermination now. On the flip side, however, it was no longer a dimension. What did this signify? This signified that it could use heavenly venerable seals. Wang. Only a single symbol lit up on its body, yet this symbol alone was able to increase its power by countless folds. As it lashed out with its tentacles, it was surprisingly able to unleash a battle prowess equivalent to 1/10 of its prime. Just like Ling Han, it had also mastered all of the heavenly venerable seals. This was easily understandable. Just how long had it lived for? And just what kind of existence was it? Would it have been difficult to deduce all of the heavenly venerable seals? However, it was still Ling Han who had the upper hand. His power was the greatest, so neither Hysteria nor Extermination was able to rival his powerful punches. Peng, peng. The two ultimate elites were continuously sent flying by him. Right now, there was no one who could rival Ling Han. He was the undisputed #1 elite in the world. After scheming for so long, was Extermination truly going to end up empty-handed? Were all her efforts truly to no avail? Extermination unleashed a long cry before dashing toward the golden orb. "Not so fast," Ling Han said coldly. He dashed over and threw a punch. Peng. Extermination was surprisingly smashed into pieces. Ling Han was astonished. Even though his punches were powerful, they shouldn't have been powerful enough to shatter her. After all, that was Extermination. Sure enough, Extermination's shattered body continued to dash toward the fuzzy door. With the golden orb at the center, her shattered body then started to knit back together. "Ha ha. The secret of the world is mine," she laughed, with her raven hair fluttering in the wind. Extermination. Chong Yang and the others howled. They were all filled with raging fury. Before allying with her, it had been agreed that they would also obtain a portion of this treasure. This was a crucial treasure that would decide whether they could advance to the 8th tier or not. "Did you people really think that I would honor my promises and Tao oaths?" Extermination asked. She roared with laughter, and continued smugly, "Bunch of fools. If I advance to the 8th tier and jump out of this world, will the so-called Tao oaths still be able to constrain me?" Extermination was truly a shrewd and scheming person. She screwed people over no matter who they were. Ling Han charged over, and roared, "If Tao oaths can't constrain you, then let me blast you into oblivion." He threw a furious punch at Extermination. The two of them became locked in a fierce battle again. However, after swallowing that golden orb, Extermination's power surprisingly started to rise explosively in an exponential manner. Boundless energy rolled through the void, funneling into Extermination's body. "Ha ha ha. Once I absorb the power of this entire void, I'll obtain the power to shatter that door and enter a new world." Extermination laughed heartily, with a smug expression on her face. Everything was under her control, from the beginning to the end. Chapter 3082 Dividing the Energy. Chapter 3082 Dividing the Energy. 3082 Dividing the Energy. Huh! Ling Han was astonished. He discovered that even though most of the energy was funneling into extermination, there was also quite a noticeable amount of energy flowing into him. The sixth type of fundamental power grew stronger and stronger in his body, and this allowed him to absorb the surrounding energy quicker and quicker. At the same time, it was as if all of the dimensions in his body had been activated, and they were filled with vigor as they voraciously absorbed the fundamental power and charged toward the transcendent level. Secret codes of life. Ling Han came to a sudden realization. After engulfing the entire Genesis world, Hysteria had naturally formed new secret codes of life as well. These were secret codes that contained the core secret of the Genesis world. No wonder Hysteria had become so powerful before. However, Extermination's actions had caused it to self-destruct, which resulted in these core secrets of the world being exposed as well. Now, Extermination had managed to obtain these complete secret codes of life, so it was only natural that her power increased explosively. Why hadn't Ling Han managed to encounter such a situation? Ling Han pondered for a moment before coming to a sudden realization. He had only been at the 6th tier before, so due to the limit of his cultivation, he hadn't been able to elevate his dimensions at a quick speed. Of course, his speed had already been incredible to begin with. He had cultivated all of his dimensions to the high-tier high level in just 10 billion years. Now that he had advanced to the 7th tier and raised his upper limit, he was naturally able to extract fundamental power at an even quicker speed. Moreover, as his cultivation grew and stabilized, this speed would also continue to increase. In addition to this, the existence of the Genesis world before had also introduced some form of restriction and equilibrium. This had definitely affected Ling Han's speed as well. However, the situation was completely different now. The Genesis world was no more, and the vast energy in the void all funneled toward Ling Han and Extermination. That's mine! Hysteria roared as it charged over. It had also managed to catch a glimpse of the secret codes of life at that time. Otherwise, it couldn't have become so powerful. Thus, it was also able to absorb some of the surging energy. Anyhow, the golden orb wasn't simply an orb that contained the secret codes of life. At the same time, it was also something that could gather fundamental power together. Otherwise, one wouldn't be able to absorb the secret codes of life so quickly even if they obtained it. Ling Han, Extermination, and Hysteria battled against each other as they fought to absorb this energy. Chong Yang and the others also wanted to grab a slice of this energy. However, to say nothing of the fact that they were too weak, they would be sent flying with a single punch. They wouldn't be able to absorb this energy even if they were powerful enough. After all, without grasping the secret codes of life, would they have the right to absorb this energy? All they could do was stand aside and watch on. However, this was something that pertained to whether they could reach the 8th tier or not. This huge opportunity was sitting right there in front of them, yet they were powerless to do anything but stand there and watch. This pained them so much that the rims of their eyes were about to crack. Meanwhile, Lin Luo and the others weren't worried about this fact. Instead, they frowned slightly as they worried about which of the 3 ultimate elites would eventually emerge victorious. If it wasn't Ling Han, then the situation would become as dire as could be. Boom! Waves of energy crashed through the void. The void was non-sentient, nor did it have a will. It simply operated within the boundaries of some regulation. In the view of the void, the destruction of the Genesis world simply meant that it needed to create a new one. Thus, boundless energy surged over, creating an environment that could birth a new world. What lay at the center of this surging energy was none other than the golden orb. This was the secret code of the Genesis world. This energy was far too powerful and immense, so much so that there was more than enough to satisfy Ling Han, Extermination, and Hysteria. In fact, there was so much energy that the 3 of them were almost about to explode under the pressure. To destroy a world required magnificent power. In the same way, to create a world also required magnificent power. The 3 beings had no option but to stop, focusing their full effort on refining the terrifying amount of energy instead. Otherwise, they would explode under the titanic pressure. The 3 of them sat down, absorbing the boundless energy and transforming it into their own. Inside Ling Han's body, the 6th type of fundamental power quickly reached a satiated state. He had advanced to the peak stage of the 7th tier. His cultivation speed was simply unfathomable. However, this was largely because the current situation was far too unique. After all, how many times would the Genesis world be destroyed and recreated? After reaching the peak stage of the 7th tier, the 6 fundamental powers inside him also reached a state of perfect equilibrium. Upon channeling them, Ling Han could create a terrifying absorption power. The dimensions inside Ling Han continued to grow. If it were he who had obtained the golden orb, the void would have potentially stopped funneling energy over once he raised one or several of his dimensions to the transcendent level. This was because there were far too many dimensions inside him. By just elevating their levels a little, he could quickly give birth to a brand new Genesis world. Now, however, the golden orb was inside Extermination's body. Even though she had obtained the secret codes of life, allowing her to manifest new dimensions, there were far too few dimensions inside her to begin with. Moreover, the speed of manifesting new dimensions would definitely be very slow. When Extermination cultivated all of her dimensions to the transcendent level, she had no option but to stop her extraction of the boundless energy. She needed to create some new dimensions first. Only after that could she continue to absorb energy to cultivate them. Since this was the case, how could she compete with Ling Han in terms of speed? This issue affected Hysteria even more severely. There were no dimensions inside its body, or perhaps there were only 1 or 2, so it quickly reached a state of fullness. It was forced to retreat lest it exploded into pieces again. It brandished its 8 tentacles, and it was filled with jealousy and fury. It was clearly it that had engulfed the Genesis world, and it was clearly it that had created this great opportunity. Yet, it was being forced to back down so quickly. How could it tolerate this? Hysteria swung its tentacles at Ling Han and Extermination. However, the void was filled with surging energy so concentrated that it was almost tangible. As a result, Hysteria's attacks failed to hit its targets. Not only that, but its tentacles were also reflected back by the dense energy. Hysteria unleashed several more attacks to vent its fury, yet these were all to no avail. It could only give up and turn its attention to the doorway of light instead. Beyond this was a new world. Once it left this void, left this small pond, what awaited it would be great opportunities that were far superior to the measly benefits in this small place. And after it left, it would turn around to shatter this doorway of light. You people can stay in this small pond and rot to death. It charged forward, attempting to squeeze into the doorway of light. However, it immediately discovered that it couldn't fit into the doorway no matter what. It was as if the doorway were supremely tough, and Hysteria couldn't squeeze itself through it no matter how hard it tried. It could only advance a single inch and no further. It couldn't get out at all. Hysteria shrunk itself down, all the way until it only measured 1 inch in height. It then charged at the doorway of light again. However, now that its body was smaller, the distance that it could travel through the doorway also became lesser. It still couldn't exit. It bellowed in fury. So be it if it couldn't obtain the huge opportunity presented by the boundless energy, yet it couldn't even leave through this door now. I can't leave. Then I'll destroy you. Hysteria unleashed an attack at the doorway of light. It wouldn't be so naive as to think that Ling Han or Extermination would be generous enough to take it with them when they left. So, since it had to stay trapped in this place and rot to death, then it would force the 2 of them to suffer the same fate as well. It frenziedly attacked the doorway of light, yet the doorway appeared to be surprisingly sturdy as it remained completely unharmed. No, it couldn't be described as sturdy. Instead, it wasn't enduring any force at all. Hysteria attacked the doorway for several days, yet its efforts were all in vain. It attempted to charge through the doorway again. However, it discovered that even the supremely tough nature of the doorway seemed to have disappeared. Right now, it was as if the doorway were nothing more than a projection, an intangible projection that didn't exist at all. Since it didn't exist, how could Hysteria destroy it or pass through it? Hysteria went wild with rage. It turned its attention to Lin Luo, Chong Yang, and the others. Since this was the case, then it would kill these people first. Chapter 3083 Becoming Hostile. Chapter 3083 Becoming Hostile. 3083 Becoming Hostile. Ling Han absorbed energy as if his life depended on it, and new dimensions were born one after another inside his body. While this happened, the older dimensions also continued to grow more powerful, advancing toward the transcendent level. It was unknown how long had passed, but his body suddenly shuddered at some moment, after which a burst of power surged through him. One of his dimensions had reached the transcendent level. Immediately afterward, a second dimension reached the transcendent level, and then a third, a fourth, and so on. The dimensions inside him continued to advance to the transcendent level. Time continued to fly past. Right now, the number of dimensions inside Ling Han had already gone from over 400,000 to over 1 million. Moreover, over half of them had already reached the transcendent level. There were still more dimensions being born, and there were still more dimensions advancing to the transcendent level. Ling Han truly didn't dare to imagine just how powerful he was now. One transcendent dimension alone was already equivalent to at least 10 ultimate elites at the peak stage of the 7th tier. Right now, he was about to reach a whopping 1 million transcendent dimensions in his body. Just how devastating would his power be? It would be far superior to the destroyed Genesis world. Ling Han was slightly surprised. He discovered that the flow of energy had slowed down. It wasn't that he was losing to extermination and absorbing less energy than her, but rather, less energy was being provided to them by the void. Thus, the flow of energy naturally slowed down. Ling Han pondered this for a moment before coming to a sudden realization. He and extermination had exhausted the energy in the void. However, the void was boundless, so how could it be exhausted? They had never been to the edges of the void, but since it could be regarded as a small pond, this implied that there was definitely a boundary. It was only because the void was far too large compared to Ling Han and the others that they had never been able to reach this boundary. In any case, just how much energy had Ling Han and extermination absorbed? Ling Han had cultivated 1 million realms to the transcendent level. This was absolutely terrifying. Extermination was inferior to Ling Han, yet she had probably been able to cultivate at least 100,000 dimensions to the transcendent level as well. The two of them had actually exhausted the void. It wasn't long before the last wisp of energy also disappeared. At this moment, the void had truly become void. Not even a sliver of energy remained. What? In the distance, the brawling Hysteria, Lin Luo, Chong Yang, and the others had no option but to stop. They were unable to extract any more energy from the void to replenish what they were expending. In fact, they couldn't even sense the fundamental particles anymore. How could they not be stunned? Once they used up all of their energy, they would also slowly weaken, with their battle prowess falling from the 7th tier bit by bit, all the way until they became mere mortals. This caused them to feel deep astonishment and fear. Ha 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 ha. Extermination roared with laughter, and her raven hair billowed in the void. There were over 100,000 transcendent dimensions in her body, and this resulted in her power growing hundreds of millions-fold compared to before. After planning and scheming for so long, she had finally achieved her goal. Extermination. Hysteria roared. Its previous self had stolen its great opportunity from right under its nose. This caused it to boil with fury. Just who do you think you are? Extermination said as she launched a palm strike at Hysteria. Hysteria brandished a tentacle to block this attack, yet its tentacle was immediately severed, causing golden blood to spray through the air. This released a small amount of energy back into the desolate void. Pathetically weak, Extermination said coldly. Everyone inhaled sharply. Hysteria had once been invincible, yet it was now this fragile and weak. Extermination looked at Chong Yang and the other ultimate elites from the Genesis world of the last era. An eerie smile appeared on her face, and she said, "I'm so sorry that I've disappointed you people. However, I had no other option. None of you have grasped the secret codes of life, so how can you possibly advance to the 8th tier? However, I can still bring you people out of this place and lead you into a new world. Perhaps this new world is infinitely large, And perhaps the great opportunities in our current world are nothing compared to what lies in this new world. Even though Chongyang and the 4 others were extremely pissed off by her words, the only thing they could do right now was to suppress their anger and accept this reality. Since it was impossible for them to reach the 8th tier, then only one other path remained open to them. That was to leave this place. In fact, they had also tried to enter the doorway of light just then, yet they had suffered the exact same fate as Hysteria. It was as if the doorway didn't exist at all. Anyhow, once they left and entered that larger world, perhaps they would quickly find an opportunity to advance to the 8th tier. They would continue to tolerate extermination for the moment. Chongyang and the others flew toward extermination, all of them eagerly looking forward to a bright and beautiful future. Linghan didn't stop them. He wasn't in a hurry. Extermination had indeed become countless times more powerful than before. However, had he not? He could only be more powerful than her. Everything was within his grasp. Chongyang and the 4 others, as well as Golden Silk Moth and 10,000 Shadows, all flew toward extermination. A glorious future awaited them. Extremely eager, aren't you? Extermination said with an eerie smile. Do you want to see the world that lies beyond this small pond? Expressions of yearning appeared on the faces of Chongyang and the others. They had already reached the end of their cultivation path, and it was impossible for them to take another step further. The only way they could advance was by jumping out of this heaven and earth. Curiosity was a trait shared by everyone. This was especially the case for powerful beings like them, and they were even more eager to see what lay beyond their own heaven and earth. And the answer to this question was about to be revealed. Pu. A streak of blood squirted into the air. Something unexpected happened. Extermination suddenly lashed out, stabbing her hand into Chongyang's back and thrusting it forward so that it exited from his chest. Clasped in her slender hand was a beating heart. Ah! Chongyang wailed in agony. What did it matter that he was a 7th-tier ultimate elite? Standing before extermination, his once invincible physique was now as fragile as paper. It was completely unable to resist her attack. Extermination withdrew her hand, causing Chongyang to instantly fall forward into the void. His face was as white as a sheet. 7th-tier elites were undying, and they could stay alive even if their hearts were destroyed. However, it was also because of this that each part of their body was extremely precious. After losing their heart, it would take them heaven knew how long to grow a new one. Why had extermination suddenly attacked him? Was she killing her meritorious subordinates now? She no longer had a need for them, so she was going to exterminate them now? Shatter Mountains, Golden Silk Moth, and the others hurriedly shot back in retreat, their eyes filled with shock and terror as they looked at extermination. Once rulers of the world, these 7th-tier elites were now no longer the high and mighty beings of the past. Standing before Linghan and extermination, they were so weak that they were barely worth a mention. Meanwhile, the once peerless Hysteria could only be regarded as a 2nd-tier force. Hysteria had also tried to kill Chongyang, Lin Luo, and the others just then, but it had only been able to suppress them and not kill them. In comparison, it was abundantly clear that extermination and Linghan were now countless times more powerful than it. Why? Chongyang howled in rage. Losing his heart was a grave wound that would require tens of billions of years to recover from. However, the Genesis world had already been destroyed, and the energy in the void had already been exhausted. So, how could he possibly recover? A cruel smile spread across extermination's face. She lashed out again, and the sound of shattering bones sounded again and again. Shatter Mountains, Big Dipper, and the 2 other ultimate elites from the Genesis world of the last era all suffered harrowing fates. Their arms and legs were crushed, and their hearts and lungs were also plucked. Was she torturing them? Lin Luo and the others all shook their heads. No matter how they looked at it, it seemed as if extermination was exacting revenge on them for some personal grievance. Extermination wasn't truly extermination. Instead, this person had simply taken control of this body. So, just who in the world was she? What kind of grudges did she hold against Chongyang and the others? Are you people curious about who I really am? Extermination asked with a cold smile. Chapter 3084, 3084 True Identity. Chapter 3084, 3084 True Identity. 3084 True Identity. Was the truth finally about to be revealed? What was Extermination's true identity? Just who in the world was she? Peng. Extermination launched a palm strike, and Chong Yang's left arm was instantly transformed into a cloud of blood. Chong Yang howled in agony. However, more than the pain, he felt an unspeakable sense of terror. The only thing that remained in this heaven and earth was void nothingness. There was not an inkling of energy to be extracted. In other words, it would be impossible for him to recover from these grave wounds. At the same time, it would be impossible for him to regenerate any cultivation that he lost. How could he not feel utter despair? Why was Extermination attacking him with such viciousness? Just how had he offended her to deserve such a wretched fate? The hope for a glorious future sits right here in front of you, yet I'm going to crush your dreams just like this. How does this feel? Extermination laughed. She wasn't targeting Chong Yang alone, and she was also targeting Big Dipper, Shatter Mountains, and the others. Their limbs and bodies had all been brutally mutilated by her. Ling Han didn't stop her. Chong Yang and the others had asked for this themselves. They had insisted on siding with a vicious monster. Moreover, Ling Han also wanted to find out Extermination's true identity. Thus, he would allow her to act smugly for the moment. Do you feel despair? Do you feel regret? Extermination sneered and taunted them each time she attacked them. Her words were dripping with venom, and Chong Yang and the others truly wanted to cry. They had believed her Dao oath, and they had thought that Extermination was truly going to cooperate with them. They hadn't imagined that Extermination would turn hostile at the very last moment. They were unwilling to accept this fate. However, what could they do now? At that time, you people lied to me and tricked me into blocking Extermination. You promised me that you would only unleash that attack after I retreated to a safe distance. Yet, what did you people do? Extermination said coldly. Her voice was filled with resentment. What? Chong Yang and the others were stunned, so much so that even their heads went numb. A name, a figure, suddenly flashed across their minds. They were filled with sheer disbelief. Why Yuri? Heavenly Venerate Yellow Sand. What? Extermination's true identity is actually Heavenly Venerate Yellow Sand? How is this possible? Didn't Heavenly Venerate Yellow Sand die when the Genesis world of the last era was destroyed? Back then, Heavenly Venerate Yellow Sand had held Extermination back, while Chong Yang and the others had detonated the Genesis world and unleashed an ultimate attack. Extermination had been blasted into pieces, and Heavenly Venerate Yellow Sand's divine sense had also been obliterated. Only an empty shell of his body had remained. Now, however, they were being told that Heavenly Venerate Yellow Sand was actually still alive. And he had actually taken over Extermination's body. This was astounding. This was inconceivable. That's right. Do you people finally remember now? Extermination said as she roared with laughter. Her expression appeared especially sinister at this moment. Pa. She threw another palm strike, instantly crushing Chong Yang's head. Oh, I'm truly sorry. I accidentally used too much force. Ah, you're dead, she said as she cocked her head and looked at Chong Yang's lifeless body. Her strike had obliterated Chong Yang's head and destroyed his mind. He was naturally as dead as could be. 7th-tier elites being indestructible and undying was now a fact of the past. There was no such thing as being indestructible and undying anymore. Ling Han, Lin Luo, and the others all sighed in emotion. As it turned out, Heavenly Venerate Yellow Sand hadn't sacrificed himself willingly. Instead, he had been tricked by the others. No wonder the current Extermination was so cruel and resentful. Extermination turned around to look at Shatter Mountains and the others. A menacing smile appeared on her face, and she said, however, you people would have never imagined this, huh? When the Genesis world was destroyed, all of the souls were fused together, including mine. Even though most of my soul was destroyed, a small sliver of it was fortunate enough to remain intact. Countless souls fused together, allowing my soul to recover. In fact, My soul became even more powerful than before. However, it was a shame that I was nothing more than a soul. I was like rootless duckweed. After countless years, I did indeed manage to find my own body. At that time, I could have chosen to become heavenly venerate yellow sand again. Extermination paused for a moment and swept her gaze over Shatter Mountains and the others. Her voice dripped with bitter resentment as she continued, however, choosing to become yellow sand would mean that my strength would remain the same as before. If that were the case, then how could I repay your kindness? So, I found Extermination's body and used the remnant power of the Genesis world to repair it. Do you know how long I spent? 3,000 epochs. Don't be surprised. Even though the history of this Genesis world isn't that long, there was a gap of more than 2,000 epochs between this Genesis world and the previous Genesis world. Why was I able to persist? It was because of my resentment toward you people. I was unwilling to accept my fate. I wanted to seek revenge. I repaired Extermination's body and became its host. However, far too long had passed already. Moreover, the old Genesis world had already lost all of its life force. Without a special trigger, I was also unable to revive. It was at this moment that I discovered that not only had I lived, but Extermination had also lived. It had transformed into hysteria. So, I activated the power of the Genesis world of the last era and unleashed waves of energy to draw those fools over. I used them to reactivate that broken world. If I hadn't done this, then I would have slumbered in the void forever. As for what happened afterward, I'm sure that I don't need to explain. All of you already know. The funniest thing is, before your minds fell into a slumber, I imprinted a mark of life on them and purposely revealed that there was a huge secret hidden in Foam Wooding's body. You were convinced that he could lead you to the world's core and help you advance to the 8th tier. Absolutely hilarious. I didn't give this much thought at that time, because I didn't think that I would be able to live again. I simply wanted to play a sick joke on you people. Just how disappointed would you feel after finding out that it was all a lie? To be tricked by someone who had died countless years ago. Even if I had been dead, I would have still laughed in my grave. However, I still prefer the current situation. What do you people say? Extermination finally stopped speaking. There was a complicated look of satisfaction on her face as she looked at Shatter Mountains and the others. Once the truth was revealed, everything suddenly became understandable and simple. The current Extermination was Heavenly Venerate Yellow Sand, the person who had been screwed over by them in the past. Thus, she was filled with bitter resentment and a thirst for revenge. Simply killing Chong Yang and the others was already unable to satiate her thirst for revenge. Thus, she had meticulously formulated and executed a plan, extending her lie that pertained to the world's core. She had convinced Chong Yang and the others that they could eventually advance to the 8th tier. It was also because of this that they had willingly joined her side. In reality, Chong Yang and the others had indeed provided her with a lot of help. Otherwise, hysteria wouldn't have been able to engulf the entire Genesis world so quickly. You people don't need to dream about entering the new world, nor do you need to dream about advancing to the 8th tier. Extermination said calmly. Alright, you people already know the truth now, so I assume you can die in peace? Yellow Sand, you're truly vicious, and you're truly able to endure hardship. Shatter Mountains spat through gritted teeth. In order to exact revenge, Heavenly Venerate Yellow Sand had even been willing to enter the body of a woman. Just this alone was already astonishing enough. Not only that, but she had never revealed an iota of resentment or hatred toward her 5 mortal enemies, either she had appeared normal the entire time. Her ability to conceal her true emotions was truly terrifying. After some further thought, however, this also made sense. She had already suffered through 3,000 epochs by herself, so what else was there that she couldn't endure? Die! Extermination roared as she unleashed an attack at Shatter Mountains and the others. Pang! There was a tremendous shake, and a look of astonishment spread across Extermination's breathtakingly beautiful face. Her strike had been blocked by Ling Han. Chapter 3085 Regret or No Regret? Chapter 3085 Regret or No Regret? 3085 Regret or no regret? Ling Han actually made a move, and stopped extermination from committing murder. If extermination wanted to kill Lin Luo and the others, then it was naturally not strange for Ling Han to make a move, but why did he want to save Shatter Mountains and the others? This scene was truly confusing and inconceivable. You dare to stop me? Extermination said balefully, flames flickering in her eyes. Ling Han smiled calmly, and said, I'm going to kill these 4 people with my own hands. I'm already quite displeased that you have killed one of them, and you still want to do it again? Extermination was furious. Her black hair stood on ends. She had hated Chong Yang and the others for as long as 3,000 epochs. What kind of deep hatred was this? Now that her cultivation had reached the peak, and she had tricked Chong Yang's group of 5 miserably, the climax was naturally to kill all 5 of them one by one at this moment and obtain a perfect revenge. But she was stopped by someone after killing only Chong Yang. She was extremely displeased and furious. Since that's the case, I'll kill you first. Extermination shouted, and charged towards Ling Han. Ling Han attacked, and exchanged blows with extermination. Peng, peng, peng. The intense battle started again. Currently, the strength of these 2 persons had already reached a level that even those at the peak of the 7th tier could not hope to catch up to. A single ripple of energy could not only send 7th tiers flying, but also cause them to vomit blood endlessly. Even Hysteria couldn't withstand it, and had no choice but to retreat under the surging energy waves. However, it was too powerful, and the energy waves alone couldn't injure it. You're actually this strong as well? Extermination was shocked. She had originally thought that after absorbing all the energy in the void, she would be able to crush any existence. She did not expect that Ling Han was actually not any weaker than her. How is this possible? It had to be known that only after she had obtained the Golden Sphere, which was the complete secret code of life, had she absorbed such a vast amount of energy. As for Ling Han, the secret code of life that he had obtained was not complete at all, so how could it compare to hers? Extermination was unable to accept this. Ling Han's current strength was completely unreasonable. Surprised, right? Ling Han said calmly. There's something that would shock you even more. He had only used 10% of his power, and this was already enough to fight against extermination. Thus, if he went all out, suppressing extermination would be a piece of cake. Extermination gritted her teeth, and shouted, Damn brat, how dare you snatch my opportunity. Hysteria didn't know that if it wanted to break out of this small pond, it had to obtain the energy of the entire void. Only then could it blast open the barrier that transcended the dimensional level and enter the mysterious and unknown new world. Extermination knew of this because she had witnessed the destruction of the Genesis world twice, and had even obtained the tiny bits of consciousness of the Genesis world. But now, she speculated that half of the power had been obtained by Ling Han. This meant that she was unable to open that door and enter the new world. How could he do this? This world, including the void, had been sucked dry, and no new Genesis world could be born, leaving behind an inexhaustible emptiness. Who could withstand living in such a world for countless epochs? Just thinking about it was enough to drive one crazy. No, there was still hope. Extermination stared at Ling Han. As long as I kill you and obtain the energy in your body, I can still open that door and enter into a new world. Stop dreaming. Hysteria sneered. That doesn't exist at all. Otherwise, I would have gone out long ago. It was no longer a match for its previous incarnation, but if it had the chance, it didn't mind delivering a blow to this opponent from its previous life. Extermination sneered. Idiot, what you're seeing isn't a real door at all, but coordinates, a weak point in space. As long as you absorb the power of the void and bombard that point, the real door will open. Oh, so that was how it was. Hysteria, Shatter Mountains, and the others all came to a realization. No wonder they couldn't charge out no matter what. It turned out that they were too weak, and didn't have the qualifications to open that door. It was no wonder that the door didn't seem to exist. It was untouchable and unreachable. Indeed, it was only a guide, and not a real existence. Extermination let out a long howl, and used all sorts of techniques repeatedly, attacking Ling Han. However, Ling Han ignored her, and instead focused his gaze on Shatter Mountains and the others. "You old bastards, I told you to work hard at the front line, but not only did you not listen to my advice, you even hooked up with this damn transvestite. You even colluded with Hysteria and caused the destruction of the Genesis world. Let me ask you, do you regret it?" He moved as fast as lightning, and grabbed Shatter Mountains in his hand. As early as when Ling Han had just advanced into the 6th tier, Shatter Mountains had already been no match for him. Now, not only had Ling Han reached the 7th tier, he had also absorbed almost 90% of the entire Void's energy. There were millions of transcendent dimensions in his body. What kind of concept was this? To say nothing of 1/7th tier, even if 100 million 7th tiers joined forces, they might not be able to stop him. Shatter Mountains was shocked, and his entire body was covered in cold sweat. "Put him down," Extermination roared, her tone sharp. She hated Shatter Mountains and the others to death, and it was precisely because she hated them to the core that she had to personally kill these 4 people. Otherwise, how could she vent the anger in her heart? After so many years, what kept her from going crazy was the desire for revenge. Now, as she reached the peak, she was about to taste the sweetness of revenge. However, this satisfaction was suddenly snatched away. How could she not be furious? She acted as if she had gone mad, and attacked Ling Han with all her might. Lin Luo and all the others had complicated expressions on their faces. A dignified ultimate elite of 7th tier had actually become a toy that was being fought over. It wasn't that Ling Han and Extermination wanted the battle prowess of the 7th tier, they just wanted to kill him with their own hands. Even though they were standing on opposite sides with Shatter Mountains, Lin Luo and the others were incomparably emotional because they were also 7th tiers, so it was inevitable that they would have some complicated emotions. As for Big Dipper, Half Moon, and Mysterious Feather, these 3 heavenly venerates only felt a sense of empathy towards Shatter Mountains. Being targeted by both Ling Han and Extermination, how could they not feel distressed in their hearts when either one could easily crush the 3 of them to death? After the death of Shatter Mountains, it would be their turn. Ling Han completely didn't care, and one of his hands casually parried Extermination's incomparably terrifying attacks, while his other hand gripped Shatter Mountain's neck. With the force of his 5 fingers, Shatter Mountain's neck bones emitted crisp cracking sounds. What indestructible physique of 7th tier! In front of the current Ling Han, it was so fragile that it couldn't even withstand a single blow. "Old thief, do you regret it or not?" Ling Han asked again. "I regret it," Shatter Mountains said in a hoarse voice. He truly regretted cooperating with Extermination and bringing his own end. He didn't even know that he had been betrayed. And they just had to go against a freakish fellow like Ling Han. Otherwise, with Ling Han fighting against Extermination now, they might even have a chance of winning. As long as Ling Han won, he would be able to open that door and bring them to the new world. What a happy ending that would be, but now, it was too late for regrets. "It's good that you regret it." Ling Han nodded, and squeezed his 5 fingers. Shatter Mountains turned into a shower of blood. His gaze was baleful as he stared at Big Dipper, Mysterious Feather, and Half Moon. Chapter 3086 Killing Ultimate Elites Like Slaughtering Chickens. Chapter 3086 3086 Killing Ultimate Elites Like Slaughtering Chickens. 3086 Killing Ultimate Elites Like Slaughtering Chickens. No, Extermination screamed as if she had lost both her parents, but also like she had gone mad. Vengeance against Chong Yang and the others was already her obsession. She didn't know how many times she had thought about how to kill them one by one, but the immortality and indestructibility of a 7th tier wasn't just for show. It was only now that she finally had the ability to casually slaughter 7th tiers. However, Shatter Mountains had been killed by Ling Han. This simply made her heart ache. "You bastard, I'm going to shred your corpse into 10,000 pieces." Extermination attacked with all her might, intending to blast Ling Han into pieces. Hee. Ling Han only smiled faintly. Previously, everything had been manipulated by Extermination, and Hysteria, the great demon of 2 generations, Lin Luo, Chong Yang, and other 7th tier ultimate elites could be said to have become her chess pieces, played easily in the palm of her hand. Now, it was no longer up to her. Ling Han fixed his gaze on Half Moon, and charged straight at him. Previously, Half Moon and the other two ultimate elites had already started fleeing. However, they no longer had any fundamental power left to extract and utilize. They could only rely on their own power to display their might. This greatly affected their speed. In terms of power, who else could compare to Ling Han? Ling Han had only taken a single step forward, but had already caught up to Half Moon. He reached out to grab him. "How dare you!" Extermination let out an enraged roar, and chased after him crazily. But could she make it in time? Ling Han stretched out his hand, and Half Moon fell into it. "Old bastard, do you regret it?" Half Moon gritted his teeth. He had already seen it before. Shatter Mountains became a dead man after saying that he regretted it. Therefore, he had to grit his teeth and keep his mouth shut no matter what. No regrets. Ling Han exerted strength in his hands, and under the pressure of unparalleled power, Half Moon's bones made a cracking sound. His face even turned purple-red as he felt extreme pain. Instead, it was extermination that stopped. She knew that it was impossible for her to snatch him back from Ling Han's hands. So, she set her eyes on Big Dipper and Mysterious Feather. Although she couldn't exact a perfect revenge, it was better than not being able to kill even one of them, right? She flew towards Big Dipper. Big Dipper and Mysterious Feather really didn't know how to describe their feelings at this moment. As dignified 7th-tier ultimate elites, they had actually fallen so far from Gracheto the point of becoming prey that were hunted by others. This was truly too tragic. 7th tier. They were 7th tiers, the greatest in the world. Yellow sand. Hysteria roared, and moved its tentacles to grab him. It also hated extermination the most, even if it clearly knew that it was no match for her, but it still came forward to stop her. Scram. Extermination slashed down with her hand, and Hysteria was instantly sent flying, with golden blood flowing as another tentacle was cut off. However, Hysteria was laughing loudly because Ling Han had already caught up and intercepted extermination. Ling Han shook his head inwardly. This Hysteria was really stupid. Even without it trying to hinder her, Ling Han could easily catch up to extermination because he had obtained 90% of the power of the void. He was absolutely invincible. Forget it. He didn't need to feel sorry for it anyway. Do you regret it or not? Ling Han parried extermination while still suppressing Half Moon. The terrifying power was simply not something a 7th-tier physique could contend against, causing Half Moon to scream incessantly. He persisted for a long time before finally saying, I regret it. Firstly, he really couldn't withstand it any longer. He felt like he was better off dead than alive. He might as well pray for a good death to free himself. Secondly, this was indeed the truth. He regretted it. He regretted listening to extermination's words. He regretted not going all out and killing Ling Han, who had still been very weak at the time. All right, then die. Ling Han squeezed hard. Half Moon also turned into a mist of blood. Ling Han. Ling Han. Ling Han. Extermination roared loudly, her eyes burning with rage, reaching a state of extreme fury. What are you screaming for? It's not your turn yet, Ling Han said calmly. He looked at Mysterious Feather and Big Dipper. Who was going to be next? As his gaze swept over them, Mysterious Feather and the other felt a sense of sorrow and endless despair. Extermination had also entered a berserk state. She panted heavily with a ferocious expression on her face. Her eyes suddenly lit up as she stared at Hysteria. If she killed it and plundered its power, then she would be evenly matched with Ling Han. Now, she would definitely win. Yes, that was it. She let out a long howl and charged towards Hysteria. Ordinary 7th tiers were useless as their power was less than 1/1,000,000th of hers. What was the use of plundering them? Ling Han smiled, and his figure darted out. He actually arrived first, grabbing one of Hysteria's tentacles, and then abruptly flung it out. Peng! Hysteria instantly transformed into a streak of light that shot toward the endless void. It's not your turn yet. Stay in line and wait, Ling Han said, and turning around, he he charged towards Big Dipper. Big Dipper also stopped running. He knew that Ling Han was already strong enough to instantly obliterate heaven and earth. "I regret it," he said directly. "Rather than being ravaged and killed, it was better to seek a good death." Peng! Ling Han threw a punch and blasted Big Dipper into smithereens without showing any mercy. Since he had betrayed them, he had to be prepared to die. Ling Han looked at Mysterious Feather again, and his killing intent did not diminish even after killing 3 ultimate elites. Instead, it became even more intense. Mysterious Feather also accepted his fate and closed his eyes. "What I regret the most is listening to that B*TCH's words. Also, that I didn't kill you when I had the chance. Unrepentant." Ling Han snorted coldly and threw a punch. Peng! Mysterious Feather was also killed. At this point, all of the ultimate elites of the Genesis world of the last era had been annihilated. Oh, actually that wasn't the case. Strictly speaking, there were also extermination and hysteria. They all came from the Genesis world of the last era. Golden Silk Moth and 10,000 Shadows trembled. In front of Ling Han, 7th tier elites were like toys, and could be blown to bits simply by a raise of his hand. They hadn't broken through to 7th tier for long, and hadn't enjoyed much of such prestige yet. They didn't want to die at all. Fearful things just had to come. Ling Han had already set his sights on them. What else do you have to say?" Ling Han asked calmly. What could they say? What was the use of regretting now? Hadn't Shatter Mountains and the others all been killed? 10,000 Shadows' first reaction was to flee. Facing Ling Han, this had already become his normal reaction, but now he was completely unable to move his legs. He only felt that his entire body was powerless, and he was unable to move at all. Golden Silk Moth gritted his teeth and knelt down in front of Ling Han. "Greetings, Master." Ling Han was stunned, and only then did he remember. Back then, when he was at the 5th tier, he had already suppressed Golden Silk Moth, wanting to take in a 7th tier as his servant. Later on, Golden Silk Moth had run away, and he thought no more of this matter. Now that the Golden Silk Moth was calling himself a servant, it was obvious that it wanted to use this to trade for his life. "I don't need a useless slave like you," Ling Han said. Betrayal required a price to be paid, so how could Ling Han be fooled just by him kneeling down and discarding his dignity? He stretched out his hands and grabbed outward. Golden Silk Moth and 10,000 Shadows landed onto his hands. 7th tiers. Hee. Right now, they were really nothing more than a trash-like existence. "Since you have nothing to say, go die." Ling Han's arms jolted. Peng, peng, the 2 ultimate elites immediately turned into a rain of blood. Chapter 3087, 3087 One Body. Chapter 3087, 3087 One Body. 3087 One Body. Extermination's chest rose and fell rapidly. She was enraged, extremely enraged. Since Ling Han killed her people, she would die. She charged towards Lin Luo and the others. Ling Han humphed, and his figure moved swiftly, blocking Extermination's path. "Your opponent is me," he said calmly. Peng, with a punch, Extermination was sent flying. "What?" Extermination's beautiful face paled. In this strike, she discovered that her strength was much inferior to Ling Han's. "Damned transvestite, don't disgust me." Ling Han could feel his goosebumps rising. Thinking back to Extermination's flirtatious expression previously, all that remained was incomparable disgust. Deep down, Extermination was a man, and she was heavenly venerate yellow sand. Extermination let out a piercing scream. In her opinion, what difference was there in being a man or a woman? Having reached the height of the 7th tier, was there still a need to care about gender? However, after being insulted by Ling Han like this, she really couldn't tolerate it. Nonetheless, she did not engage in a fierce battle with Ling Han. Instead, she turned around and chased in the direction of where Hysteria had disappeared. Only by killing Hysteria and plundering its power would she be able to compete with Ling Han. Of course, she was being delusional, but this was also the only solution that she could think of now. She exerted a terrifying force, and her delicate body moved at an indescribable speed. She gave chase while searching for Hysteria's life force fluctuations. There was only emptiness here, and there were no more energy storms, so the aura of life couldn't be concealed, even a little bit of it would have been distinctively evident. As extermination tracked Hysteria down, her figure moved faster and faster. In just half a day, Hysteria's figure appeared ahead of her. With 2 severed tentacles, it looked rather miserable. Right now, Hysteria had already descended from its strongest level, but it was still unbelievably strong. It could still suppress Lin Luo and all the other heavenly venerates by itself. Die! Extermination charged over. Her 5 fingers were like claws as she grabbed Hysteria. Hysteria roared and attacked with its tentacles. Peng! Hysteria was naturally at a huge disadvantage in this exchange. Compared to extermination, it was far inferior, and another one of its tentacles got blasted off again. Don't kill it. This one is also mine. Ling Han's voice rang out. He was calm and unruffled, just like a person who was protecting his food, warning others not to snatch his food. Extermination gritted her teeth. She attacked crazily. If she didn't kill Hysteria and use all its power, she wouldn't be able to suppress Ling Han. If she couldn't suppress Ling Han, she wouldn't be able to leave this space, and could only go crazy in this kind of emptiness and cold desolation. Ling Han also made his move. How could he allow extermination to kill Hysteria? If it was to be killed, he would be the only one to do it. He easily blocked extermination with one hand as he fixed his gaze upon Hysteria. Hysteria's remaining 5 tentacles fluttered gently. Facing Ling Han, it felt an unprecedented chill. Xiao, it moved and pounced forward. However, its target was actually not Ling Han, but extermination. Was it courting death? Even Ling Han had not expected that Hysteria would charge over, dashing towards extermination. Not bad, not bad. Since you're going to die anyway, why don't you give me your power? At the very least, I'm still a manifestation of your previous life. Extermination laughed loudly as she extended her slender hand. Pu, it directly pierced through Hysteria's head. Boom! Hysteria's 5 tentacles surged wildly, and its golden body rapidly dimmed. Its energy was rapidly depleting while continuously being plundered by extermination. Ling Han originally wanted to stop her, but after thinking about it again, he decided to let it go. In fact, he had absorbed almost 90% of the Void's power by himself, while the remaining power had been divided between Hysteria and extermination, with extermination having taken up 90% of the remaining power. Therefore, it didn't matter whether the power of Hysteria was being absorbed by extermination or not. Let her rejoice in vain. Ling Han watched from the side. Very soon, extermination would know that what she was facing was an insurmountable mountain. Hysteria's golden body quickly turned silver, then white, and finally black, as if it was degenerating. This process was really fast. Extermination shook lightly, and Hysteria then turned to ashes and completely disappeared. The great calamity that had once harmed the 2 generations of Genesis world was gone just like that. Xiao, Xiao, Xiao. Lin Luo and the others also rushed over, and happened to see this last scene. They couldn't help but feel slightly emotional. Ling Han. Extermination shouted loudly. After absorbing the power of Hysteria, her power had increased by more than 10%, and she was filled with confidence, believing that it was enough to suppress Ling Han. At their heights, even a minute increase in power would have been staggering, not to mention increasing their power by 10%. It could even change the outcome of the battle. I'm not deaf, so there's no need to shout so loudly, Ling Han said calmly. He even dug his ears, appearing very nonchalant. I want you, extermination said, but before she could say the words to die, she was stunned. Then, she suddenly hugged her head. Hysteria, you're really haunting me. I've clearly destroyed your physical body, but you've entered my mind with your spirit. Ling Han's expression darkened slightly. This I want you wasn't expressed clearly, and was quite ambiguous. Moreover, the person who said this was a damn transvestite. Just thinking about it made one feel disgusted. You want to fight with me for control of this body? How naive. Extermination roared. Get out! Get out! But then, Extermination said, this body was originally mine. Even though you refined it, it is still more compatible with my soul. I am the master of this body. Get lost. I've plotted for so many years before this happened, and you want to reap the fruits of my labor? Winner takes all. Why are you spouting so much nonsense? Extermination seemed to be talking to herself, but Ling Han, Lin Luo, and the others all knew that this was actually two souls, Extermination and Hysteria, fighting for control of this body. This might seem a little confusing. Since Hysteria's physical body had already been destroyed and returned to its original form, it was better to call her Extermination, but Extermination was actually Heavenly Venerate Yellow Sand. The two souls were fighting, and a strange scene appeared. Another head actually grew out of Extermination's neck. You, the original head, shouted sharply. Of course, it represented Yellow Sand. Haha, this is my body. Even after being tempered by you for so many years, I can still obtain half of the command, the new head said. This was naturally Hysteria, the earliest Extermination. Get out of here. You're the one who should get lost. The two heads shouted at each other, each commanding one hand to fight. This. Ling Han felt speechless. Was this still the number one ferocious beast of the world? Why did he look like a freak and a retard? Forget it, I won't be watching such a show anymore. How disgusting. Since the two fiends had already merged into one, he would deal with them together. Ling Han threw a punch at Extermination. Ha! Extermination's two heads roared furiously at the same time as each one commanded the one hand on either side to meet Ling Han's attack. Chapter 3088, 3088 One Last Fight. Chapter 3088, 3088 One Last Fight. 3088 One Last Fight. Boom. Extermination exchanged a blow with Ling Han, but she was no match for Ling Han at all, and was instantly sent flying. Ling Han caught up to her, and swung his fists continuously, with each strike bearing enough power to crush Extermination. Extermination's two heads roared as they swung their hands with boundless power. However, in front of Ling Han, this kind of power could only be said to be insignificant, and was easily extinguished by a casual punch from Ling Han. Peng, peng, peng. After a few hundred punches, Extermination was beaten into a tragic state. However, she also had about 10% of Ling Han's strength. Thus, it would not be easy to kill her, at least not with just a few punches. Let me do it, scram to the side. Heavenly Venerate Yellow Sand's head said to Extermination's head. I'll do it. I'm the true master of this body. Give me all the control. Extermination's head said indignantly. Peng. Ling Han punched out, and Extermination's body was instantly sent flying. We can't go on like this. Like this, we'll both die together. Fuse. Extermination and Yellow Sand looked at each other with determination. Ling Han was too powerful. They were inferior to him in the first place, yet they still had to compete for control over this body. Wasn't this courting death? Wang, Extermination's body emitted a powerful aura as the two souls began to fuse. They were truly at the end of their rope. Otherwise, who would be willing to merge their soul with another? In terms of soul possession, if one didn't like it, one could still switch to another body. However, once the souls were fused, they would truly be together forever, unless they died. Peng. Ling Han threw a punch, and Extermination was immediately sent flying. He chased after her. Peng, 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 his fist struck out furiously, wanting to completely destroy this ancient great evil. Extermination's two heads were roaring. The two heads were then seen getting stuck tightly together, and sank into each other. They fused very quickly. This scene was quite scary and disgusting, but it wasn't just a fusion of the body. At the same time, it represented the unification of the two souls. From then on, there would no longer be any Extermination or Heavenly Venerate Yellow Sand. In its place was a brand new soul. Boom. A terrifying aura surged, and the black dress on Extermination's body was immediately shattered, revealing her graceful and mesmerizing body. However, a black aura immediately surged out of her body and covered her. As if she had just been reborn, She let out a long breath and opened her eyes abruptly, releasing an indescribable pressure. The two souls had completely fused and obtained perfect control over their body. At this moment, extermination had reached an unprecedented level of power. She was filled with confidence as she looked down at Ling Han. Ling Han, your doomsday has arrived. Peng. Before she could finish her sentence, a heavy punch landed on her face and sent her flying. Fuck you. Ling Han caught up to her. Did you think you're very impressive and awesome? He hadn't unleashed his full battle prowess all this while, alright? Extermination's face was filled with disbelief. She had already fused the power and the souls of two beings, yet she was still no match for Ling Han. How was this possible? She was in a daze, and could not accept it at all. Peng. However, Ling Han's fist swung over again and directly sent her flying, letting her know that this was not a dream, but rather an incomparable reality. Peng, peng, peng. Ling Han's punches came upon her like rain, continuously crashing down. Extermination roared, and she channeled all of her heavenly venerable seals. An incomparably complex symbol shone on her forehead, and then she charged toward Ling Han to meet the attack. Peng, she was sent flying with a single strike. Even with a boost of 100,000 times in strength, she was still no match for Ling Han. No, her power didn't increase at all. How could such a thing happen? It was very simple. Why could the heavenly venerable seals increase one's power? That was because the heavenly venerable seals were a bridge that connected with fundamental power. The higher the level of the heavenly venerable seals, the wider the bridge, and more fundamental power would surge over, resulting in greater boost of power. But now, the Genesis world was gone, and there was no more energy in the void. So what if extermination channeled the heavenly venerable seals? Where could she extract power from? When the well had dried up, what was the use of a bucket? Peng, Ling Han chased after extermination, continuously unleashing fists of fury. This time, extermination really didn't have any other methods. In the current situation, any secret technique would be useless, only the one with greater power would win. And undoubtedly, not only was Ling Han's power stronger, his power was almost 10 times stronger, and not just stronger by a slight margin. There was not much improvement in their physiques, as they were still stuck in the so-called immortal and indestructible state of the 7th tier. No matter who struck whom, they could cause great damage to the other party. Right now, only Ling Han would be able to tyrannize extermination. Pu. Blood splattered everywhere. Extermination was in an extremely miserable state. Lin Luo and the others sighed. It seemed like everything was about to end. Extermination roared. She was indignant, and filled with resentment. She had already reached such a height, but she would still die? Why did Ling Han exist? You brought this upon yourself. Ling Han said coldly. Both yellow sand and extermination belonged to the Genesis worlds of the previous era. At that time, if extermination hadn't had the intention to dominate the Genesis world, why would she have been targeted by so many ultimate elites, and why would they have ended up risking the destruction of the Genesis world to kill her? Heavenly Venerate Yellow Sand had also brought this upon himself. He had been reborn, and if he hadn't had such great ambitions, how could he have fallen to such a state? Therefore, he had brought this upon himself. He couldn't blame anyone. I can't accept this. I can't accept this. Extermination shouted as she fought back. She really couldn't accept this. Lin Luo and the others were extremely emotional. Although extermination hadn't been killed yet, the outcome had already been decided. The fiends that hounded the Genesis worlds of 2 eras were finally going to be executed, and could no longer stir up trouble. However, not only had the Genesis world collapsed this time, but even the void had been sucked dry. Could another 3rd-generation Genesis world be born? Impossible. The only way out now was to open that door and enter a new world. If the new world was also nothingness, then they would live in this desolation forever. Hopefully, it wouldn't be this bad. The more Ling Han fought, the more violent he became. Extermination had to die as the Genesis world had been destroyed because of her, and countless lives had been lost. It would be unforgivable if she did not die after all that. Ling Han attacked wildly. So what if extermination's power could suppress that of a 7th tier? The injuries on her body were getting more and more severe, and she was not far from death. You forced me to do this, extermination said in a resolute tone. Xiao, the space between her brows split open, and a beam of light flew out, shooting straight towards Ling Han's forehead. This was her soul. She was very decisive. Since she was no match for Ling Han in terms of power, she would compete in divine sense. If her divine sense was superior, she would be able to dominate Ling Han's mind, and thus control Ling Han's body. This way, she could become the strongest through another method. However, this was too dangerous. Without the protection of the physical body, the soul would be extremely fragile. Once the soul was destroyed, one's divine sense would be destroyed as well. However, there was no way out for extermination, so she could only give it a try. Chapter 3089 Bring Peace to the World. Chapter 3089 Bring Peace to the World. 3089 Bring Peace to the World. Extermination's soul was very powerful, and it was now a fusion of two souls. The former heavenly venerate was even more incredible as he had fused with the souls of countless living beings in the Genesis world of the last era. Although more than 90% of the souls had been reduced to ashes by the destruction of the Genesis world at that time, even with only 1% left, it would still be indescribably powerful when fused into a person's body. Thus, extermination was confident enough that she could compete with Ling Han for control of the body, even if it was Ling Han's own body. Peng, with a heavy punch, extermination's spirit was instantly shattered, but these fragments all entered into Ling Han's body, converging towards his mind. With every piece, extermination's divine sense would become stronger. Upon reaching Ling Han's mind, she also transformed into her human form. Being shattered by Ling Han's fist was naturally a heavy blow to extermination's spirit. Right now, it was only left with less than 1% of its original strength, but this was already enough, far 10,000 times stronger than an ordinary 7th tier. On the outside, without the control of extermination's divine sense, her physical body naturally couldn't continue fighting any longer. It was blasted apart by only a single punch from Ling Han, and endless energy surged violently, transforming into billowing waves. Ling Han's body automatically absorbed this incomparably vigorous energy. Once he finished absorbing it, it would be equivalent to the energy of the entire void and the entire Genesis world converging onto his body. This was an endless power. However, Lin Luo and the others were all nervous. The divine sense of extermination had not been severed, and had even entered into Ling Han's body. If she controlled Ling Han's body, then all the good fortune would be obtained by her. Ling Han, you must hold on. You can't fall on this final step. Within the mind, extermination strode forward, heading straight towards the core of Ling Han's mind. She wanted to find his spirit and kill him. This way, she could easily plunder Ling Han's physical body. Looking for me. Ling Han appeared, and his soul also transformed into a human form. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, not feeling the slightest bit of nervousness. Extermination looked at Ling Han, and revealed a cold smile. You're too conceited. Although your physical strength is invincible, when it comes to the strength of your soul, it's impossible for you to compare to me. You are destined to be killed by me, and your body will become my new body and head to a new world. And all of this has nothing to do with you. Ling Han shook his head, and said, You talk too much nonsense, and are wasting my time. So, hurry up and disappear completely. He took the initiative to attack and threw a punch at extermination. If you fight me here, your own strength won't be of any use at all. Extermination cackled as she sent a palm strike towards Ling Han's direction. Peng. This attack was solid, but it didn't cause any waves. This was a clash of divine sense. However, extermination's expression changed drastically, and she was immediately sent flying. Her body was also torn apart, turning into countless fragments. Fortunately, this was a soul. Extermination's body quickly reassembled and returned to its original state, but it was obvious that she had shrunk. This attack was very damaging to her. How can your soul be stronger than mine? Her face was filled with disbelief. Ling Han smiled calmly, and said, "You've fused with many souls from the Genesis world of the last era, so you think you're very impressive and awesome, right? But you wouldn't have thought that the number of dimensions in my body now far exceeds the sum of the two Genesis worlds of these two eras combined. Moreover, they're all of the transcendent level, and have also developed living beings. Living beings will have willpower. When their willpower is combined, how could you be a match for them?" Even if Extermination's soul hadn't been harmed, and she had fused with all the souls during the destruction of the Genesis world, she still wouldn't have been able to compare to Ling Han, let alone under such circumstances when she had had to bear with discounted power. If she could still be stronger than Ling Han, that would be unreasonable. "Now, get out of my body." Ling Han charged over and threw a punch. Peng! Extermination instantly retreated as her figure dimmed. She had suffered another serious injury. You deliberately let me invade your mind. This way, you can easily destroy my physical body and obtain all the energy." Extermination came to a sudden realization with the strength of Ling Han's divine sense. It was utterly impossible for her to invade his mind. Thus, Ling Han had intentionally screwed her over. Peng! 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 Under the continuous barrage of attacks, Extermination could only retreat step by step. In the end, she was blasted out of the mind, expelled from Ling Han's body, and transformed into a ball of flickering light. Now that her physical body had been destroyed, her remnant soul was like a rootless duckweed. Extermination was unwilling to die. She looked at Lin Luo and the others, wanting to plunder another body. "You're deluding yourself," Ling Han said. He threw a punch, and Peng, Extermination's soul, was instantly shattered. Boom! A ripple spread through the entire void. The tyrant of an era had finally perished and completely disappeared from the world. It had to be admitted that Extermination was an incomparably powerful existence. Unfortunately, she had to stand against Ling Han. Lin Luo and the others were all watching. Right now, Ling Han was absorbing the boundless energy of Extermination. When Ling Han completed this step, he would possess the ability to pierce through this world. Now, the void was already dead, and it was impossible for the Genesis world to be reborn. They could only hope that Ling Han would open the door to a new world. Otherwise, although they would not die, they would feel even worse than death. Endless life, endless loneliness, and endless silence. 100,000 years later, Ling Han suddenly opened his eyes, and a majestic light flashed past like a thunderbolt. He casually moved his limbs, and a terrifying power instantly surged, as if the void couldn't withstand it, and was about to shatter. "Ling Han!" Lin Luo and the others said one after another. For an ultimate elite of 7th tier, 100,000 years of waiting was naturally not a big deal. There was an end to waiting like this. If Ling Han told them that he was unable to break through this heaven and earth, then even Lin Luo and the others would feel as if time was crawling and eventually go crazy under that boundless despair. Ling Han nodded, and looked at everyone. "Now, I have enough power to open that door and head to another new world, but I also don't know what the situation there is like. Everyone, are you going or staying?" Unsurprisingly, Lin Luo and the others expressed that they were going. If they stayed here, so what if they had eternal life? This kind of loneliness was unbearable. "Alright, then I'll open this door." Ling Han arrived at the place where the door of light had appeared earlier. He channeled all of his power, and threw a punch. Peng! The void trembled, and a passageway was forcefully formed. "Everyone, let's go." Ling Han turned around, revealing a faint smile. Chapter 3090, 3090 New World. Chapter 3090, 3090 New World. 3090 New World. Lin Luo and the others nodded. "I'll go first." Lin Luo stepped out, wanting to be the vanguard. This was actually very risky. Who knew what dangers lay outside? Perhaps there were as many 8th tiers as there were dogs. They could kill any 7th tier with a casual punch. If he walked out so rashly, what if he was slapped to death? Without waiting for Ling Han to stop him, Lin Luo took the lead. Ling Han knew that Lin Luo was intentionally testing the waters for him. If there was really any danger, then Ling Han could also make some preparations. However, although Lin Luo was the first to leave, it was difficult for him to take even a single step after entering that door. He had only taken 5 steps when he stopped. Then, that door of light, seemingly possessing incomparable elasticity, bounced Lin Luo back with a bang. To pass through this door, you need endless power, Lin Luo said with a bitter smile. He had originally wanted to test the waters for Ling Han, but he hadn't expected that he wouldn't be able to do even this. Bai Fan, Xin Fu, and the others tried one by one, but they couldn't pass through. Opening the door required the energy of the entire void, so it would probably be the same if one wanted to transmigrate through it. Ling Han thought for a moment, and said, "Everyone, you'd better enter the dimensions inside my body first. Otherwise, I'm worried that once we get out, this door will close, and I won't be able to open it again." Yes. Everyone nodded. Ling Han moved, and drew everyone into his body. In any case, he had already created transcendent dimensions that numbered in the millions, which was far more powerful than the Genesis world of the past, and was enough to bear the power of these 7th tiers. Now, he was the only one left in the vast void. He looked at the door of light, then looked behind him, and a resolute expression appeared on his face. He suddenly turned around and strode forward. Ling Han entered the door of light, and an endless wave of resistance instantly assaulted him, wanting to push him back. No wonder Lin Luo and the others were unable to pass through this door. Such resistance was truly formidable. However, to Ling Han, who possessed the power of the entire void, this was still not an obstacle. Ling Han took large strides forward, and under the vigorous oscillation of his power, the power that could stop a 7th tier in his tracks seemed insignificant. He went deeper. Behind the door of light was a passageway that seemed to have a life of its own, squirming as it was. Boom! Behind him, the void was collapsing. The space he had been living in was about to disappear. Now, there was no turning back. He could only move forward. Ling Han walked faster and faster. His will was resolute, and since he had already made up his mind, he would not hesitate at all. Forward, forward, forward. He wanted to know if there was really a great world beyond this small puddle. The void behind him collapsed in large swathes, even affecting this passageway. The door of light shattered with a loud bang. Peng, peng, peng. The entire passageway began to collapse as well, and the destruction was rapidly spreading toward him. This speed was even faster than Ling Han could walk forwards. Fuck. Ling Han did not know how powerful the destructive power of this collapse was. Perhaps it could even injure his physical body. Therefore, it was best that he did not let it catch up to him. He sped up, becoming as fast as lightning. However, after running for almost an hour, Ling Han suddenly discovered that there was no path ahead. It was a dead end. Ling Han roared furiously, and raised his fist. All of his power condensed, and blasted forward. Bang! How powerful was he? With a furious blast, the area in front of him instantly shattered. No matter what it was. A burst of light struck him, catching him off guard, and causing him to immediately close his eyes. Peng! He fell to the ground. Ha! The divine stone has come into being. The divine stone has come into being. A voice rang out beside Ling Han, carrying an incomparably pleasant surprise. Ling Han was stunned at first, and then a strange feeling rose in his heart. He clearly didn't understand the other party's language, so why did he understand what this person meant? He wanted to get up, but he realized that he was extremely weak. He didn't even have the strength to get up. This surprised Ling Han, and he even felt a trace of fear. He had fused with the power of the entire void. How powerful was he? But now he couldn't even stand up. Ling Han tried his best to open his eyes, and turned to look. He saw an old man walking towards him. He was short and had messy hair, and his face was filled with excitement and a crazy smile. At this moment, Ling Han felt incomparably weak, as if he were an ordinary person, or even more inferior to an ordinary person. His first reaction was to release Lin Luo and the others from his body. He didn't know why he was exhausted, but Lin Luo and the others were at the 7th tier, which was enough to ensure his safety. However, He immediately realized that he couldn't release them at all. What happened? What happened? The old man had already come over and flipped Ling Han over, his eyes sizing him up. The divine stone shattered on its own, and the divine sun appeared, descending upon my ancient Tao sect. This is a Tao child bestowed by the heavens, indicating that my sect will rise in the upcoming great era. What was this old man talking about? What divine stone and divine sun? Was he talking about him? Don't move. Don't move. The old man pressed down on Ling Han. His power was so great that Ling Han couldn't move at all. You've just been born, and you've exhausted all your power. You're currently extremely weak. Do you understand what I'm saying? The old geezer looked at Ling Han with great anticipation. Ling Han finally turned over and looked behind him. There were many stone fragments there, and one of them was extremely huge. Based on his inference, this had originally been a massive rock that was close to a spherical shape. Now, the stone had shattered, but the stone fragments below it were still there. Combined with the old man's words, Ling Han had a guess in his heart. Did he break out of this stone just now? Was this even possible? The Genesis world and the endless void were actually inside this stone? Ling Han was so shocked that he was speechless. No wonder extermination and hysteria had always said that they lived in a small puddle. In terms of size, this was actually not even comparable to a small puddle. He nodded at the old man. I can understand. You can understand me, but I can't understand your words, the old geezer said. I'm really curious. 30 years ago, Lord Sect Master brought the divine stone back, and said that according to ancient records, it would give birth to a supreme spirit embryo. It's been more than 30 years. I've finally completed my wait. The old geezer was very excited, as if he had found a huge treasure. Ling Han's mind was filled with thoughts of disbelief. He had worked hard all the way in the Genesis world and fought until he was the strongest, but he had actually only managed to snatch the right to be born. Where was his supreme power? Ling Han was dejected, and his mind was blank. This was like a person who had become a billionaire through hard work, but suddenly, for no reason at all, he had turned into a poor beggar. How could such a disparity in status be easily accepted? He didn't even realize how he was carried away, and then placed inside a room. After that, he was in a daze. It seemed that many people were coming in and out, saying something, but it was too far away for him to hear a word. However, only 2 days later, Ling Han pulled himself together. As long as his people were still around, he could start all over again. Moreover, there were countless people living in the dimensions in his body, and there was too much responsibility on his shoulders. He had to pull himself together. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.